Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show. The journey back to the Tower of Dusk from the Blackstone Mountains only took Lin Li a couple of days, but when he returned to Black Cloud's town with Norfeller and Edgefalusi, he realized that a bloodbath had occurred in Black Cloud's town. There were collapsed houses everywhere, and bloodstains could be seen on the streets. What's going on? Where did everybody go? When he saw this, Lin Li immediately assumed the worst. He tried to scan the whole Black Cloud's town using his mental strength, only to realize that he could not detect a living soul at all. He could not be bothered to conceal the fact that his servants were undead creatures and led them to the Tower of Dusk straight away. Thankfully, there were no signs of an attack on the Tower of Dusk, but when he entered, he realized that the place was empty, and there was no trace of the mages. Mr. President? The President is back. Just as Lin Li stood in the center of the Great Hall, trying to find someone to ask about the situation, a middle-aged mage ran out, looking emotional. Beckley? Lin Li could barely remember his name. There were two kinds of people in school who left a deep impression on others, the kind that topped the rankings in school and those who were at the bottom. Beckley belonged to the latter. He was of mediocre magical talents as he was still only a level 8 mage even though he was in his 40s. Mr. President, it really is you. I'm Beckley. Beckley was rather emotional that the president remembered his name. Oh, Beckley, what happened while I wasn't here? Where did everybody go? Lin Li asked, curiously. You see, Mr. President, as he did not usually have a chance to talk to this young president, Beckley was having a hard time controlling his excitement. A couple of months ago, just after you left, the Sire bandits attacked Black Cloud's town, destroyed the church at the center of the town, and dug out something from beneath it. The Sire bandits again? These idiots don't know any better. Lin Li frowned as soon as he heard this. The Sire bandits were getting too bold, weren't they? When he heard of their origins, he sympathized with them. But this did not mean that they could do as they pleased. Moreover, after the ambush at the Scar of Death, Lin Li had lost all sympathy he had for them. It seemed like he would have to go to the Dragon Mountains to finish off every bit of the Sire bandits. They attacked the Black Cloud's town? I passed by there on my way back. Could it be that everybody? Beckley, who knew that the president was close to the people in the Black Cloud's town, hurriedly explained, Mr. President, we rushed over the minute we got the news, but still many people fell victim to them. We've only managed to save a small portion of them, and settled them somewhere safe. What about Uncle Salet and the rest? The time Lin Li spent in the Black Cloud's town was the most peaceful time he had experienced ever since he had arrived in Amril, and it made him feel as though he was back where he'd been before. The people in the town were like his old neighbors, and were all friendly and amiable. Just like old Salet, the friendly old man who opened a small blacksmith shop, and his landlady Auntie Susan, and little Jack who brought him fruits. Beckley's expression changed as he stuttered. And Mr. President, when we got there, old Salet had already. I got it, Lin Li nodded his head. The expression on his face did not change much either, yet the words he spoke felt as chilly as ice to Beckley and made his hair stand on ends. Right, what about the rest? Lin Li looked puzzled as he looked around the Tower of Dusk. Sendro said that his mages had returned 2 months ago, so why did the Tower of Dusk look so empty? Even though he knew that it was not aimed at him, the president's hostile tone still made Beckley break out in a sweat as he hurriedly replied, President Jirian and the rest returned a month after the incident, and when they heard about it, he said he was going to bring them to settle scores. The rest could not persuade him against it, hence they followed along. Okay. Lin Li relaxed a bit when he heard this as this sounded like something Jirian would do, but immediately after that, a look of doubt appeared on his face. When did they leave? They left a few days after they heard about it, so maybe about 2 months ago, Beckley said, looking worried himself. What, 2 months ago? Lin Li was shocked by the news. The boss of the Sire bandits, Vanscore, had ambushed him along with the elites of the bandit group, and they were all killed by him. The Sire bandits had to hardly have anyone left. While the Tower of Dusk was not incredibly powerful per se, they should be more than enough to deal with the remnants of the bandits. When he thought of this, Lin Li quickly asked, "Do you know what happened to them? Why aren't they back yet?" Beckley shook his head, and said, "When President Jirian left, he only instructed me to wait for you to return. I haven't heard from him in the past couple of months." Bloody hell, Lin Li cursed quietly. Things could not be clearer. Jirian was an archmage himself, and along with him were a few other archmages and a group of mages, so how ridiculous was it if they had to take more than 2 months to get rid of a bandit group that was already on the brink of extermination? Lin Li was willing to bet his life that Jirian and the rest were not only dealing with the remnants of the Sire bandits there. Needless to say, there was a decently powerful force supporting the Sire bandits, but who could it be? Lin Li was pretty familiar with all the forces that had made a name for themselves around Duland, and there were many who could go against the Tower of Dusk, but not many of them would dare to. The guest list from his inauguration ceremony had spread throughout the whole of Duland, and there was no way that these forces would not consider the consequences of going against a guild that was becoming stronger every day in order to help a bandit group on the brink of extermination. Who would be so much of a fool as to offend a guild that had good relations with so many powerful individuals? Lin Li's expression was unreadable, and made Beckley panic as he was worried that the young president would vent his anger on him. Mr. President, I asked to go along, but... Oh, don't worry, it's not about you. Lin Li was pulled back from his thoughts as he watched Beckley stutter, trying to explain himself. He quickly waved his hands to get the less than talented mage to stop worrying. "Keep guarding the Tower of Dusk, I need to go to the Dragon Mountains again." But just as he was about to step out of the door, Lin Li suddenly recalled something. Weren't the Sire bandits on good terms with the Manhwa family? From what Hutton said, it seemed as though they had good relations and many business dealings, which was why Vanscore had listened to Hutton's command to ambush him back in the Scar of Death. Could the Manhwa family be behind this? Right, he remembered hearing the mention of something below the church from the Manhwa family's underlings. Beckley. Lin Li halted in his stride when he thought of this. "Yes, Mr. President?" Beckley quickly jogged in front of Lin Li. "Write a letter in my name and have someone send it to the Manhwa family in Aminya." "Yes." Beckley nodded his head respectfully before he carefully asked, "Mr. President, what should I write about?" "Tell the Manhwa family that their ally, the Breezy Plains Guild of Magic, intends to exterminate the remnants of the Sire bandits next week, and is requesting that they adhere to our agreement by sending out mages of at least level 10 to assist us." Oh, Beckley was obviously stunned. Since when did the Tower of Dusk and the Manhwa family become allies? The Manhwa family was not just any random force either. Even though Beckley had never left Duland, he still knew enough about this triad family far away in Aminya. The Manhwa family was founded 200 years ago by the most powerful adventurer in the history of Breezy Plains, Leo Manhwa. He was the first patriarch of the Manhwa family. Since then, this triad family had monopolized all the underground dealings of Aminya, and became the true power ruling over Aminya. They were truly a powerful figure, and besides the Dark Blade that also hailed from Aminya, no other force in the whole region could go against the Manhwa family. The newly set up Tower of Dusk was insignificant in comparison to the Manhwa family, and because of this, Beckley looked more doubtful. Mr. President, do you think we should make a few changes to the letter?" "That will not be necessary, just write it like I said it." Lin Li shook his head as he gave a strange look to Beckley, wondering what was wrong with what he said. "Then shall I make a trip to Aminya myself?" "If you go, then who will guard the Tower of Dusk?" "Don't bother, just get someone to do it," Lin Li hurriedly replied before he called Norfeller and Ujfalusi, who were waiting at the side, and turned to leave the Tower of Dusk. Sigh. Beckley shook his head somewhat indignantly as he watched Lin Li leave, silently lamenting the fact that President Felix was indeed too young. While he had slowly realized that this young president was unlike other young mages, this time, Beckley felt that the president's flaw of being too young was incredibly evident. Who were the Manhwas? They were the ones ruling over the whole of Aminya, so how could a small guild of magic order them around? And President Felix was basically ordering them around based on what he said, and he was even specifying what kind of people he wanted them to send. If Beckley had been the patriarch of the Manhwa family, he would not even have bothered to reply and would have just thrown the letter in the trash. Only when he could not see Lin Li anymore did Beckley shake his head and return to the Tower of Dusk. He laid out a pen and a sheet of paper in front of him before he started pondering how he could phrase the letter better. President Felix might be young and not know better, but he could not afford to botch this, or they might end up with another powerful enemy instead of an ally. A dusty carriage stopped in front of the Manhwa family's gate in Amidst City, and a tired-looking middle-aged mage alighted from it, paying his fare before he walked up the steps. If Lin Li had been here, he would have immediately recognized him as the mage he had instructed to stay behind and guard the Tower of Dusk. Even though he'd been instructed to stay, Beckley decided that given the influence and status of the Manhwa family, it would not be beneath the president for him to pay a visit himself. It was already disrespectful that he, a low-ranking mage, was doing the job, so he could not imagine what would happen if he had someone random do the job instead. "Hold up, what is it?" The guards in front of the door stopped him rudely. "I'm Beckley, a level 8 mage from the Breezy Plains Guild of Magic, the Tower of Dusk. I would like to meet the patriarch of the Manhwa family." Beckley did not dare to delay at all after receiving instructions, and hurried over to the Manhwa family's house by traveling day and night. One guard stared at Beckley before disdainfully saying, "What Tower of Dusk, why haven't I heard of it before?" While mages had a high status, Beckley was only a level 8 mage, and it was true that he was somewhat insignificant in the Breezy Plains. Even though they were merely guards, they were standing guard in front of the Manhwa family's house, and thus they did not care much about a level 8 mage. "How dare you lie to the Manhwa family? It seems as though you're tired of living," another guard said as he placed his hand on his sword. "Gentlemen, please let me pass, I have urgent matters to discuss." "Leave now. You think just anyone can enter the Manhwa family? If you don't leave now, I'll cut off your head." The guards half drew their swords out and reflected the sunlight into Beckley's eyes with the blades. "Why are you causing such a ruckus at such a place? Is it not embarrassing?" A voice came from behind Beckley suddenly. The two guards quickly stood up straight and bowed before chorusing, "Young Master Hutton." Hutton walked up the stairs with two people behind him before he looked at the guards and asked, "What's going on?" A guard pointed at Beckley while he said, "Young Master Hutton, this man claims to be a messenger from the Tower of Dusk and has been yelling that he wants to see the patriarch." "Oh?" Hutton's expression turned serious as he looked at Beckley more cautiously. "You're from the Tower of Dusk?" "Yes." Hutton gave Beckley a look. There indeed was the Guild of Magic's unique crest on the black robes, and from this, it seemed that this messenger was not an impostor. Since the fact that the Manhwa family and the Tower of Dusk were allies had not been made known to the public yet, the only ones who would know this secret beside himself were the people of the Tower of Dusk. But if President Felix sent a messenger now, could it be that there were problems on the Tower of Dusk's side? Hutton was secretly pondering this question, but he did not realize that the two guards had taken notice of his expression and completely misunderstood it. They thought that Hutton was getting annoyed, and that the Guild of Magic called Tower of Dusk was most probably just another force trying to get the Manhwa family's help. Having worked in the Manhwa family for over a decade, they had seen their fair share of such situations, and already knew how to handle it without Hutton having to give orders. All right, whosoever you are, just leave the letter and go. Young Master Hutton will look at it some time later." Well, Hutton was to blame for being too deep in thought. When he realized what was going on, he was too late. The two guards had already flanked Beckley and escorted him out. Bloody hell, Hutton felt his mind go blank, and thought he really might be better off dead. Damn it. I've gotten myself into hot water now. Hutton looked up in a daze, and saw the two guards who looked incredibly proud of themselves, as though waiting to be praised. He really did not know whether he should burst out in laughter or tears. But above it all, he really wanted to break open their skulls to see if there was anything inside their heads. Did they know who that Felix of the Tower of Dusk was? Damn it, he was a 20-years-old legendary mage, and had just gotten hold of 3 of Juresco's relics. He was sure to enter the sanctuary realm in his lifetime. No other force in the Breezy Plains would dare to offend such a lunatic, much less the Manhwa family. Besides, Hutton knew what kind of attitude this young president had towards him after interacting with him in the Blackstone Mountains. The dark blade was powerful, huh? Stephen had an incredibly strong backing, right? But just because they had injured a few of the Tower of Dusk's mages, they had lost about 10 archmages. He did not even know whether Stephen was alive. If Beckley were to tell on them when he got back, who would be able to deal with the consequences? This was not something that could be solved with some bickering or a few fights. Given the personality of President Felix, he would most likely laugh it off, but silently take note of this. When he got an opportunity, he would make sure that the Manhwa family would never be able to make a comeback. What was worse was that he definitely had the means to make sure this happened. Hutton could not help turning pale when he heard this, and did not even bother to deal with the two idiots. Instead, he rushed to Beckley's side and helped him up just as he was about to fall. "Are you all right, Mage Beckley?" I'm fine." Beckley finally regained his balance, only to realize that the person who had helped him up was the young master of the Manhwa family, the genius mage who was said to inherit the entire Manhwa family in the future. He could not help but forget his anger as he was pleasantly surprised, and quickly thanked him. Thank you. You're too kind, Mage Beckley. Since you're a messenger from the Tower of Dusk, then you are an honored guest of the Manhwa family. It was a small misunderstanding earlier, I hope you won't take it to heart." Hutton smiled as he quickly soothed Beckley before waving over a few men. "These two gentlemen are no longer fit to be guards, take them away and settle it." "Roger." A few warriors of at least level 15 charged over on Hutton's orders and dragged the shocked guards away. Cries for help came from a distance, and Beckley would have to be a fool not to know that this would not end well for the two guards. His expression froze. This young Master Hutton's attitude was somewhat unlike what he had expected. Beckley walked with cautious steps as his head was filled with questions. He followed Hutton into the study, and was served tea and snacks while he exchanged greetings with Hutton before Hutton finally coughed dryly. "Say, Mage Beckley, I wonder why President Felix sent you." "You see, young Master Hutton," Beckley retrieved the letter he had written on behalf of Lin Li from his pocket before presenting it to Hutton while he briefed Hutton on the situation at the Tower of Dusk. "Oh," Hutton quickly glanced through the letter before nodding his head. "Which is to say that the Tower of Dusk is intending to exterminate the Sire bandits and needs the Manhwa family to supply some manpower. That's about it." Hutton nodded, and did not say more. This was not simply a request for manpower. How powerful was the Tower of Dusk? While others might not know, surely Hutton did. The legendary level president alone was enough to cause a sensation in the breezy plains, and he was only 20 years old. His potential could only be described as immeasurable. Moreover, he had the 3 relics of Juresco, and it was almost certain that he would reach the sanctuary realm. He would be of the level of the Ashen Warlock then, and not many forces would dare trifle with him. The young president also had a group of decent mages under him. Also, many forces were said to have good relations with the Tower of Dusk, like the Glittergold Union, the Brilliant Shrine, and the Darkness Shrine. Hutton had seen with his own eyes that the High Priest of the Darkness Shrine, Sendros, had been chatting away with the young president. Needless to say, while the Tower of Dusk had only been around for a short while, they were almost destined to become one of the strongest forces of the breezy plains. In comparison, the Sire bandits were pathetic. The most powerful person in the entire Sire bandits was Vanscore, who was at level 18, but where was he? He had already died at the hands of the young president in the Scar of Death, and amongst those who died with him were also the 300 most elite warriors of the Sire bandits. What would happen if the two forces collided? Hutton did not even need his brain to know that it was not going to be much of a fight, if any at all. If that President Felix still sent someone with a letter even though the difference in strength was so extreme, then there had to be more to this than it appeared to be. He wanted the Manhwa family to make their stance clear. This was indeed President Felix's way of doing things. On the surface, he was low-key and mild, but only those who had interacted with him would know that this person was beyond arrogant. He had sent a letter over, and while he appeared to be friendly, the only thing the letter was trying to say was that the Manhwa family could either choose to be closely related to the Tower of Dusk, or they could choose not to have anything to do with the Tower of Dusk at all. Wait, Hutton suddenly remembered something, the handwriting was off. Damn it, this bastard can't even write his own letters. But still, none of that anger could be seen on Hutton's face. On the contrary, there was no anger on Hutton's face at all he did was smile even more widely at Beckley. Well, that was how things were now. The Manhwa family and the Dark Blade had been feuding for the past century or so, and even Cheyenne, who had entered the legendary realm, could not lead the Manhwa family out of this predicament. Only during Hutton's time did an opportunity present itself in the form of the newly set-up Tower of Dusk. After experiencing the journey into the abyss of Tharlan and seeing how the young president had pulled off a miracle after miracle, did Hutton regret his decision back then. The biggest mistake of his life was convincing Vanscore to set up an ambush in the Scar of Death. He had had to put in 100 times more effort to make up for that wrong decision, and only when they left the abyss of Tharlan and the Blackstone Mountains did his effort result in a small payoff. The young president finally decided to make the Manhwa family an ally, but Hutton knew that this relationship was incredibly fragile, and a small mistake could render it moot. When that happened, he would surely face more trouble than he had in the Blackstone Mountains. That young president of the Guild of Magic was definitely a paranoid man, one who would not hesitate to strike first if he felt threatened. He was the kind who would deal a fatal blow that'd ensure that the threat never had the chance to surface before it was completely wiped out. The only reason he was still fine was because he had put in enough effort after the incident and was lucky. He had to admit, he'd been incredibly lucky back in the Blackstone Mountains. Stephen's timely appearance had diverted the young president's attention, and Hutton could not help but celebrate the fact. If not for Stephen's arrival, he would most likely have been the one to meet with Stephen's tragic fate. Looking back at the letter, he saw that he was to send out 50 mages who were at least level 10 to help the Tower of Dusk in their quest to exterminate the Sire bandits. It was a difficult feat for the Manhwa family indeed. 50 mages of at least level 10 would make a decent troop anywhere, and it was a difficult task to send out a troop like that just because this young president gave the word. What if the Dark Blade suddenly struck? The Manhwa family would be in huge trouble. But still, this was a rare opportunity for the Manhwa family to be tied closely to the Tower of Dusk, an opportunity for the Manhwa family to be set free of the Dark Blade. The rise of the Manhwa family in Aminia only took place in the recent 2 or 3 decades. Although they had been involved in all kinds of underground businesses, they had maintained a good relationship with all the other forces except the Dark Blade. They couldn't help it. Ever since the two forces had their eyes on Aminia's land, the direct clash of their interests made them unable to see eye to eye with each other. Apart from that, other forces, such as a big shot like the Glitter Gold Trade Union, or the criminal organization Sire Bandits, would have a good relationship with the Manhwa family. To some extent, this was the real reason behind the rise of the family. Before they managed to rise above everyone else, they experienced intense battles and had enemies everywhere. Similar to the Dark Age, the reign of a powerful force like the High Elves meant enough authority to enslave all the other races, and massacres were commonplace. Yet, the conclusion was the fall of the entire race, and even the uprooting of the Tree of Eternity. The Manhwa family was not High Elves, and had yet to offend the Tower of Dusk. The Tower of Dusk was fated to rise to power, and even the big shot like the Glitter Gold Trade Union would not have dared to offend them. That reason was, no one knew when their hard work they had taken years to achieve would get destroyed by a sanctuary powerhouse after many years. Furthermore, Mage Beckley had given himself an opportunity. Alright, Mage Beckley. You have traveled a long way from the Tower of Dusk to Aminia, and have to be feeling rather tired. Why don't I let my servants bring you to the guest rooms? As for Mage Felix's requests, I will give you a reply as soon as I discuss it with my father. No need for that trouble. Sir Hutton, most of the mages from the Tower of Dusk are having a battle in the Dragon Mountains now. I have to rush back to help rebuild the Black Clouds town, said Beckley as he glanced at Hutton. This is Mage Felix's instructions. I see. I won't insist, then, knowing that it was Lin Li's orders, Hutton did not try to hold Beckley back. As for President Felix's request, I will give you a reply right after discussing it with my father, Hutton said passionately as he showed Beckley to the door. What, the Tower of Dusk had sent their people here? Damn it. If that lucky fellow was still here, I would, Harvey scoffed under his breath. He got furious after hearing the news of the visit from the servants when he was returning home. The encounter he had in the Blackstone Mountains was the biggest humiliation he had received in his entire life. Harvey had heard from his father that the bastard who had insulted him was the president of some guild of magic. His intention in rushing back today was to humiliate that messenger from that guild of magic to vent his anger. He had not expected him to be clever enough to have fled before his return. At the same time, Harvey heard a piece of good news. Haha. That guild of magic was humiliated by the Sire Bandits? Harvey snorted happily. Unfortunately, before he could express all his joy, he heard another bad news. What? That guild of magic wants the Manhwa family to help them eliminate the Sire Bandits? Are they not awake? What are they to make such a request? Brother, Harvey found Hutton in a hurry. He wanted to clarify the news he had heard. That's right, Hutton ascertained Harvey's doubts. I'm about to discuss this with father. Oh, God, Harvey exclaimed in exasperation. I say, brother, are you having a fever? The Guild of Magic and the Manhwa family are two different entities. Now that their guild has been humiliated by the Sire Bandits, why should we help to back them up? Anyway, brother, do not forget that we have been doing a lot of business with the Sire Bandits over the recent years. What benefits would it bring if we help that Guild of Magic eliminate them? Benefits? Not offending the guild is a benefit by itself, Hutton replied after sizing Harvey up. He shook his head helplessly. Hutton did not know if his father had made a good decision by appointing him as the heir of the family. Although this prevented the two brothers from turning against each other due to competition for the position of the next patriarch, it turned this brother who was just a few years younger into a completely useless blockhead. He had not been doing anything meaningful, and had always been abusing his authority as a member of the Manhwa family. Things would still be fine if he did them in Amidst City, as the family would generally have the power to wipe his buttocks for him. However, the problem now was that the trouble had been created in the Blackstone Mountains. No one knew what was wrong with that dude to have the guts to offend that young president. The thought of this created fear in Hutton. President Felix was not somebody Harvey could offend. Even a person like Stephen, an archmage in his 20s, and the only heir of the Dark Blade, failed to escape retaliation from that young president despite having the backing of a few legendary powerhouses. Hutton really felt that it was a miracle for Harvey to still be alive. But... Alright, Harvey, we can talk more about it after I come back. I'm going to father's study now. Are you keen on joining me? Forget it, Harvey's expression changed upon the mention of his father's study. He was not afraid of the study, but of his grandfather, Cheyenne, who would be present in the room as well. He was not to be trifled with. To Harvey, this old man who personally taught his brother was the scariest existence on earth. He could feel his blood freezing every time he stood before him. Sigh, Hutton shook his head as he watched Harvey leave. He proceeded to head towards the study with the letter in his pocket. Sorensen Manhwa was in his 40s. As the patriarch of a mighty organization, it was supposed to be the prime of his life. But, he suddenly felt that he had aged. His eldest son had always been nurtured as the next patriarch of the family. To prevent the brothers from fighting over the position, Sorensen even made a sacrifice by letting his youngest son turn into a real blockhead. These years, Sorensen had been watching Hutton's actions. He was glad that Hutton did not fall behind his expectations. Hutton's magical abilities were outstanding among the other mages of his same age. In fact, Hutton was a son whom even Cheyenne complimented smilingly, despite being a man who was hard to please. Cheyenne said that Hutton had great potential and would have a chance to reach the legendary realm by the age of 50 as long as he did not go astray. Hutton had always been managing the family's business well. Although he was in his 20s, the tricks up his sleeves were in fact superior to those of many sly and crafty men. Sorensen had no one to blame but himself, for he had successfully led Harvey where he was today with an intentional upbringing. Furthermore, all the troubles Harvey had been creating were all situated in Eminya. No matter how serious the matters were, they could always be settled by the Manhwa family easily. If it was the usual, Sorensen shouldn't be that unsatisfied with Harvey. Unfortunately, Hutton handed him a letter today. This letter was from Duland, and the sender was a young mage with a few followers. According to Hutton, that man was about 20 years old. Usually, such letters would never get to Sorensen, yet, it was formally handed to him by his eldest son. "What do you think?" Sorensen asked in a low voice. He was not in a hurry to give his opinion. "I feel that this is an opportunity." "Huh?" Sorensen asked in shock. "What opportunity?" "An opportunity for us to get away from the Dark Blade. Although I did not get the relics mentioned by our ancestors when I headed to the Blackstone Mountains this time, I met this guild president. Honestly speaking, father, he really surprised me. I'm afraid even Mentor Cheyenne would not have the ability to see through President Felix's abilities." "What?" Sorensen asked in wonder. "You mean your grandfather?" "Yes," Hutton nodded his head. He had always been addressing Cheyenne as his mentor ever since he started learning magic from him when he was young. The salutation grandfather had become foreign to him. How? How could it be? On the day of the president's inauguration ceremony, didn't our people tell us that that president was only 20 years old? Hutton, you cannot be so reckless in your words. Your grandfather is a legendary mage. Same for President Felix. Same in what way? Sorensen paused before starting to breathe faster. You mean? Legendary mage? Yes, Hutton nodded. In fact, I witnessed it with my very own eyes. I saw this President Felix progress into a legendary mage from an archmage. This can't be. It is absolutely impossible. Not to mention the breezy plains, I'm certain that there was never a 20 years old legendary mage in Amril before. The god of mages, Juresco, was only a magic shooter when he was 20 years old. How could this Felix? This is the reality, Hutton rubbed the end of his brows in frustration. In fact, he had expected his father's response. Who would believe that there would be a legendary mage who was only 20 years old? The news was as absurd as a man getting pregnant. Yet, Hutton knew how true everything was. This incredibly young president had broken through to the legendary realm before his very own eyes, and had used an impregnable magical domain to get rid of the terrible Lord of Darkness of Amril. Although it had been some time since it happened, to Hutton, every detail was undoubtedly clear. Oh, yes. The relics in our ancestors will have been acquired by President Felix. What? If Sorensen was only in a state of disbelief before this, then this patriarch of the Manhwa family was really petrified now. Despite not knowing what the several relics in the ancestor will were, Sorensen had always believed that they had invincible powers. It was a fact that the ancestor was in existence in the sanctuary realm. How could the relics be something that could be described in simple terms? The three relics left behind by the god of mages, Juresco, were namely, the Book of Eternity, the magical crystal of the Evil Eye Tyrant, as well as the key to the Sky Castle. Haha, what Juresco gave us was the pathway to become a god. Unfortunately, I did not have this luck. Sorensen could feel his heart being struck by an unknown object every time Hutton mentioned one relic. He was leaning against his chair with a pallid face by the time Hutton told him about these three relics. Although Sorensen's potential was limited, and he did not have much achievement in the magical domain, his abilities as a level 15 archmage and lessons from his father who was a legendary mage gave him sufficient knowledge of the significance behind the three relics. That was indeed the path to heaven. Just the Book of Eternity itself was said to be the strongest weapon of Juresco, and had the ability to destroy the world. Compared to the book, the Evil Eye Tyrant's crystal was scarier. The possession of it could allow any fool to get close to the legendary realm. As for the key to the Sky Castle, it was an item that only appeared in the legends of Amril. The 7 sky castles were what the High Elves used as impregnable fortresses when they ruled over Amril. And now, the 3 relics were all in that Felic's hands. This means that one should never describe the Guild of Magic as represented by Felic as simply a new force. Furthermore, according to the information the family had gathered from all over using their connections, it was a fact that this President Felic was on incredibly good terms with many strong forces. When he was taking over as president, the guest list of the ceremony included not only the shareholder of the Glitter Gold Trade Union, but also the Archbishop of the Brilliance Shrine and the High Priest of the Darkness Shrine. Alright, I understand it now. I will convince the elders of the family, Sorensen replied solemnly as he placed the letter down slowly. It was as though the letter was not a thin sheet of paper, but a boulder that weighed 1,000 kilograms. Alright, I will talk to Mentor Cheyenne. Just when Hutton was about to leave the study, he heard frantic footsteps. Then, Hutton saw 3 elders of the family entering the room in rage, as well as a panicking Han. Good morning, elders. Hutton greeted the elders with courtesy as soon as he saw them. He had no other choice. Although he was appointed as the successor of the patriarch by the family, the 3 elders were biological brothers of Cheyenne. Their status and positions were not what Hutton could compare with. Not to mention Hutton, even the present patriarch, Sorensen, had to be very polite to them. Humph. The 3 angry old men scoffed as they saw Hutton. They showed zero basic courtesy as they walked past Hutton. Hutton laughed awkwardly before leaving the study. He knew what brought the 3 elders here, but he had no intention to meddle in the situation. Hutton had the confidence that his father Sorensen would have the ability to resolve the situation. Yet, he could not help but feel secretly affected. Are they not afraid to damage their old health by being so angry? What brings the 3 elders here? Come, quickly have a seat. Sorensen stood up in shock. He politely invited them to sit down. Humph. If us 3 old men would not come, were you plotting to sell out the Manhwa family with your son? That was the chief elder, Grum Manhwa. He had been assisting Cheyenne when he was still the patriarch of the Manhwa family. It was only 20 years ago when Cheyenne finally got a glimpse of the legendary realm, and decided to pass the patriarch's position to Sorensen. He chose to explore the entire Anral world alone and finally entered the dream realm of all mages. As the right-hand man of Cheyenne, Grum naturally became the chief elder of the family. Grum had always put in his best in all of the family's matters, and the present patriarch Sorensen also showed a lot of respect for the chief elder. As the young Hutton grew up to be a man of great potential, the Manhwa family also managed to maintain their status against the Dark Blade. It could be said that a great part of Manhwa's achievement could be credited to the 3 elders. Elder Grum, why do you say that? After I took over as the patriarch, I have always been prioritizing the family's interests. How could you say that I am selling the family out? Sorensen was dismayed by Grom's remarks, despite all the respect for him. After that, a sense of regret hit Grom. He felt that he had been too direct with his words. Since Sorensen became the patriarch, he had been working very hard for the family. Although he did not have too much significance in the rise of the family, his efforts were great. Yet, that sense of guilt was quickly replaced by anger. Always prioritizing the family's interests? If not for Harvey, we 3 would be kept in the dark about your plans. How could you and Hutton want to send the family's elites to assist that Tower of Dusk? What's the Tower of Dusk? Is it even in the breezy plains? Could your assistance bring the family gold coins or territory? Stop joking, Sorensen. That is just a force that has been established half a year ago. They only have a dozen men, including their president. I presume they wouldn't even be able to pay our travel fees if we were to go there. Elder Grom, please hear me out. This time, when Hutton went to the Blackstone Mountains. Stop mentioning Hutton. The elder snapped upon hearing the name. His fury was on the verge of burning down the study. The 3 of us were always in approval of your decision to appoint Hutton as the heir of the family for his careful and thoughtful attitude. But, this time, he really disappointed us. How could he make such a ridiculous decision without us? Elder Grom. Alright, Sorensen. I will be straightforward with you. Hutton's decision is too absurd. We do not believe that it could be a decision made by the future patriarch of the Manhwa family. As for the reason behind it, we cannot help but suspect there to be a shady deal going on between Hutton and the Tower of Dusk. And you, Sorensen, since you are Hutton's father, I presume that you should know it very well. Hence, our intention in visiting you today is to request that you temporarily step down from the position of the family's patriarch. The three of us will take over the management and hand the seat of the patriarch to a more suitable person. Elder Grom, you must be joking. That's right, the elders of the family have the power to impeach the patriarch, but it must be during a critical phase. Do you think the people in the Manhwa family would agree that I step out of my seat over an undecided matter? Sorensen could not help but feel a sense of injustice when he talked to Grom. Although he'd expected that the visit from the three elders would not end well, he had not expected that things would be as serious as to reach an impeachment. The power of the Manhwa family had always been shared between the patriarch and the three elders. It was a rule that continued for centuries. There wasn't any instance where a party would try to overturn the other. The elders rarely tried to impeach the patriarch in the past hundreds of years. When it happened, it would really mean no turning back for both parties. He could not believe that the three elders were serious in their decision of impeachment. All right, Sorensen. We will be holding a council after 3 days. The 13 stakeholders of the Manhwa family will collectively decide if you have the ability to continue in the role of the patriarch. Until then, you have to give up assistance for that Tower of Dusk, together with your participation in the family's affairs. What if I don't agree to do so? If you don't, Grom stood up slowly. You are going to carry the crime of betraying the family, he said crudely. Sorensen nearly lost his breath. He had managed the Manhwa family for a dozen years, and had never thought he would one day become a traitor to the family. Who was going to betray the family? Just when the two parties were in a deadlock, the door of the study was pushed open. The creaking of the door made everyone freeze, including the chief elder. There was only one person in the whole Manhwa family, or even the entire Amidst, who dared to open Sorensen's door without knocking. He was Hutton's grandfather, the father of Sorensen, the eldest brother of the three elders, and the man who had been managing the Manhwa family for decades, legendary mage Cheyenne. That was right. It was Cheyenne. This legendary powerhouse of Amidst looked a lot younger than his age suggested. He was well-built and good-looking. Apart from the slightly gray hair, he looked like a 30-years-old man. Perhaps it was due to the fact that he rarely smiled, but that handsome face of his looked as cold as marble, which struck fear in anyone who looked at him. He did not say anything when he entered the room, but glanced at the three elders. The three elders did not dare to start speaking before Cheyenne. Sorensen stayed in his place and did nothing to greet Cheyenne. At once, the atmosphere in the study became extremely stale. Sorensen, I heard that you are intending to betray the Manhwa family? No, father. As the descendant of the Manhwa, I would never betray the family. All right. Cheyenne nodded. No one could tell what was on his mind through his expression. This legendary mage gently put down the magic staff he always had with him. Then, he asked something that terrified the three elders. Does that mean that Grom and the others are spreading false rumors? Be big brother. We did not spread any rumors. All right. Cheyenne nodded again before glancing at the three elders once more. Why don't the three of you explain why Sorensen wants to betray the Manhwa family? It is like this, big brother, Grom spoke as he suppressed the terror within him. He told Cheyenne about the Tower of Dusk's request for Manhwa's assistance. He took 10 minutes to finish his speech. Only after finishing the story did he add his piece in self-defense. Big brother, the rule was set by the ancestors. The three of us did not want to make things difficult for Sorensen. Why should the Manhwa family form an alliance with the Tower of Dusk when they have been established half a year ago? They only have a dozen of people, including their president. Look, brother, this might agitate you, but I'm still going to say it, Hutton and Sorensen have already damaged the interests of the Manhwa family. After struggling to finish his piece, Grom felt that his back was wet with cold sweat. He could not help it. There was simply too much stress involved when he faced Cheyenne. So what if they were brothers by blood? Not to mention the dignity he had built as he took charge of the family over the years, his ability as a legendary mage alone was enough to instill fear in his brothers. It was fate that prevented his brothers from communicating with him like natural brothers. Once a person entered the legendary realm, he would not be treated like a mortal. That realm was close to the divine. It did not matter if Cheyenne was the former patriarch of the family. The distance between a legendary mage and mortals could be compared to that between the sky and the ground. To some extent, he was void of emotions of normal humans. That was evident from how he treated Hutton. Despite being his grandson by blood, Cheyenne banned Hutton from calling him grandfather. Hutton had always addressed him as mentor. This was the difference between legendary powerhouses and mortals. Average humans would never be able to understand the thinking of legendary powerhouses. Even if the three elders had great authority in the Manhwa family, such as impeaching the patriarch, all of their power would be meaningless before a legendary powerhouse. Any slightest mistake would render them eternally doomed. The atmosphere in the study turned solemn. The three elders who were there to condemn the patriarch cowered at a side, not daring to breathe in too much air. The alliance Hutton formed in the Blackstone Mountains was approved by me. We are not going to talk about it anymore. Cheyenne was extremely calm when he said that, just as though he was not talking about an alliance that would affect the family's survival, but about a burnt bread they had for breakfast. Noted. The three elders agreed to Cheyenne's calmly spoken words without further ado. All right, Sorensen. Let me look at the letter Tower of Dusk sent us. After helping Sorensen out of his difficult situation with a few words, Cheyenne requested for the letter of assistance from the Tower of Dusk. The letter was not long. It only had 100 words. In fact, if Beckley did not try to make the content more fancy, the length of the letter would be even shorter. Cheyenne finished reading the letter very quickly. Then, a rare smile appeared on that cold marbled face. Hee, this President Fellick is very interesting. Mentor, Hutton gasped. He wanted to help to speak for President Fellick. Hutton had read the contents of the letter. Although the word choice was nuanced and full of euphemism, the aggression and coercion within it was obvious. How could the wise and clever mentor not understand the real meaning behind those words? The letter was a risk for great trouble. How would any legendary powerhouse be able to tolerate such coercion? Their pride reached deep into their bones. It's all right, Cheyenne shook his head smilingly, and unlike what Hutton expected, he had zero rage in his expression. Having stepped into the legendary realm at the age of 20, it is only normal for President Fellick to have such a temperament. Don't worry, I will not object to the alliance between the Manhwa family and the Tower of Dusk just because of how the letter is written. To reject such a formidable ally just because of that would be an impulsive act that could only happen between you youngsters. I'm far from that impulsive age. When he was speaking, Cheyenne's smile carried an unabashed sense of compliment. No one knew if he appreciated the potential of that young president or was impressed with how overbearing the letter was. All right, we will let Hutton be in charge of the assistance we provide to the Tower of Dusk. Hutton, I will let you decide on the date and manpower. All right, mentor. Brother, Grim turned anxious upon seeing how that decision was going to be fixed. I beg your pardon. We are not even clear about the background of the Tower of Dusk. How could we bet the future of the Manhwa family on them? Why don't we postpone the decision? We can wait till they settle their scores with the Sire Bandits. They will have to succeed to earn the right to form this alliance with the Manhwa family. Right? Haha, all Cheyenne did was smile. Yet, that smile instilled a sense of terror in Grom. Grom, I think that you are becoming more and more muddle-headed as you age. What? Grom was stupefied by Cheyenne's response. Did you not hear what I said? The president of the Guild of Magic you were referring to is a legendary mage at the age of 20. Do you know what it entails? This means that it is fated for him to enter the Sanctuary Realm in his lifespan. That's the Sanctuary Realm, an invincible realm that even I have fear for. Did you not realize what it would mean for the future of the family if we were to offend a young legendary mage with great potential? I only suggested to postpone the agreement to observe them, and did not have the intention to offend. Observe? Haha. I'm not sure if I should call you naive or foolish. Do you not know what drove President Felix to write us this letter? Do you think a legendary mage does not have the ability to eliminate the entire sire bandits? Do you think the ambition of such a talented mage is only limited to one sire bandits, or a mere duelant? Big brother, what do you mean? Wait and see. This is just the beginning. The elimination of the sire bandits is just a welcome gift President Felix intends to give to all the forces in the breezy plains. Believe me, Grom, the Tower of Dusk with only a dozen men is fated to become one of the strongest powers in the breezy plains. They would not give any importance to forces like us and the Dark Blade. Why don't you predict who will be their next target after Dueland City? It is obviously Roland City that is in close proximity to Dueland. And, after that, it will be Aminya. If we were to decline their request for assistance, we would never have the chance to form an alliance with them anymore. They might be in cahoots with the Dark Blade and turn against us, or even engulf both Dark Blade and the whole of Aminya. The motive of this letter is not to request assistance, but an instruction for the Manhwa family to choose our side now. Cheyenne finally concluded his speech in a self-derogatory note. At this time, Lin Li had reached the Dragon Mountains. He found the camp set up by the mages from the Tower of Dusk very quickly with the help of his massive mental strength. Lin Li, who had descended from the sky, attracted the attention of the mages standing on guard. Jirian and the other mages came out of their tents, and were all looking into the sky vigilantly. That's Felix? Haha. Why are you so late? Jirian recognized Lin Li very quickly. Lin Li greeted Jirian before entering the campsite with other mages. Tell me quickly, what is happening? Lin Li asked eagerly the moment he entered the tent. Those bastards, the Sire Bandits, attacked Black Cloud's town while we were away from the Tower of Dusk. I heard that they dug something out from the church, and had harmed many villagers. Even old Salat, Jirian scoffed with anger. Even the flesh on his plump face trembled with rage. Jirian looked as though he had a strong urge to burn the bandits into cinders. In fact, Jirian did not know much about the situation. He only heard it from Beckley. After giving Jirian some time to cool down, Lin Li again asked, wasn't Sire left with a few fishes? I've gotten rid of Vanscore and his 300 men in the Blackstone Mountains. What took you so long? What could we do about it? We have beaten that group of scoundrels up the moment we entered Dragon Mountains. The weird thing is, when we were about to burn their nest down, it was as though these fellas had consumed something indigestible. They became more aggressive than usual. Our 100 mages battled them over the span of a few consecutive days, but failed to make any progress. The most absurd thing was, their team suddenly had 10 level 18 archmages. God damn it, if I had not reacted fast enough, we would have lost, Jirian complained with a sense of injustice. What, 10 level 18 archmages? Lin Li jumped. He felt bad for letting Jirian and the team suffer such a long deadlock with the bandits. The powers of 10 level 18 archmages would not be weaker than any common guild of magics. Yeah, and they are all unfamiliar faces. I presume there are other forces in it as well, said Jirian angrily. Other forces, Lin Li could not understand the link within. The leader of the Sire Bandits, Vanscore, as well as the 300 elites had died long ago. Although the Tower of Dusk had just been established, anyone could see the potential it had. It was like a rising star in the breezy plains. Lin Li could not think of any force that had their head slammed on by the door hard enough to assist an organization that had bad reputation and risk enmity with the Tower of Dusk. I suspect there to be a cave. Jirian shared his guess. Cave? Lin Li asked doubtfully. Forget it, let's not talk about that first, Jirian said as he took a seat. Things were still going quite smooth at the beginning. Thanks to you, we located the darn nest of this bunch of rascals easily. It is no wonder that the troops of the Castellan of Roland City always fail to eliminate them. Look at this unlucky place that they chose. Lin Li looked where Jirian was pointing his finger. There was a newly drawn map on the table that was placed in the middle of the tent. The map was rough, and only had a few territories drawn on it. It was mainly the region where the nest of the Sire bandits was located, as well as the surrounding areas. Look at this part. Jirian stood up and gestured Lin Li over. He pointed on the map with his short and stubby finger. There is a canyon here, and we predict it is where their kennel is located. They have 3 lines of defense outside the canyon, which acts as a fortress for the organization. They actually have 6 ballistae and 2 catapults on the first line of defense here. Come to think of it, although our Tower of Dusk has just been established, we do not have many outstanding mages under us. It is their luck to meet such a generous president like you who does not mind spending money on them. Damn it, I'm jealous of all the magical equipment, Jirian exclaimed enviously as though he saw a child who drank valuable potions like soda drinks. Oh, then how are they performing? Lin Li asked, curiously. No matter how good the equipment is, it ultimately lies with their users. A lamb that is fully donned in armor would never defeat a lion. The batch of people in the Tower of Dusk was all referred by Basil, and not directly trained or brought up by the organization. Although he had interacted with them for some time, it was not to the extent that he could understand all of their background and personalities. Speaking of this, Lin Li remembered that Basil still owed him an answer. That mage who resembled a legendary powerhouse actually requested to join the Tower of Dusk that had just been established. He could not bring himself to believe the credibility of this man. After negotiating with Basil, that man promised to tell Lin Li the truth after 2 months. Afterwards, the Tower of Dusk had to deal with the mission in the Blackstone Mountains and the leftover bandits from Sire. These commitments had postponed his interaction with Basil. I'm going to ask that old man to tell me everything when I return, Lin Li said with determination. Although he knew Basil had no ill intentions, Lin Li did not feel secure leaving this matter hanging. What are you saying? What old man? Jirian asked curiously as Lin Li spoke to himself. Lin Li waved his arms. No, it's nothing, please continue. How are these people? Hee. Fella, did you hear how a group of lambs led by a lion could defeat a group of lions led by a lamb? Under my wise leadership, what are those leftovers from the Sire bandits? I'm not boasting, but as soon as I entered the battle, I put down more than half of the 2,000 men. The rest of them had no choice but to scurry off like rats. This achievement made Jirian beam with pride. Oh? So the rest of them were the reason that held you and your lambs here for the next 2 months? Lin Li asked as he glanced at Jirian skeptically. Jirian's face dimmed immediately. He smacked his palm on the map in frustration. Damn it, that is when my luck took a turn. Do you know how long it took me to chase them to this canyon? 2 days. Not to mention that they split their men between the 2 lines of defense on the left and right side. Even if they had ballistae and catapults on the last line of defense, it would not be much of an obstacle for us. You wouldn't imagine what we met when we got really close to their nest. What? Lin Li asked curiously. He really could not imagine what treasure the leftovers of the Sire bandits could have. The alchemy colossus. Do you know? There were 4 freaking alchemy colossuses at least 10 meters tall. Jirian gestured wildly with his 4 short and stubby fingers. Lin Li was shocked by what he heard. How could somebody with alchemy background not know what an alchemy colossus was? If the practice of magic was to develop the limits of one's potential, then the practice of alchemy would no doubt lay in maximizing the use of external forces. Speaking of the alchemy colossus, one just had to talk about the extinction of the goblin race in Amril. The goblins did not have mighty powers or notable talents in magic, so they had to depend on external forces to survive. In order to make up for their natural shortcomings, the goblins used their clever and innovative minds to create the alchemy colossus, and integrated it with machinery. They paved the way for a short-term magic civilization called magic machinery. When Lin Li was playing this type of game in the Endless World, he once attempted to explore a relics mission of the Goblin City. It was like a duplicate of the human steampunk era. The products of magic machinery were commonly seen in the goblins' living environment. Of course, in a world that believed in the survival of the fittest, the products created were mostly used in wars. They not only had human-sized alchemy puppet warriors, but also many different kinds of alchemy machinery beasts. The most famous battle machine was the alchemy colossus mentioned by Jirian. The extinction of the goblin race happened before the Dark Age. When the High Elves launched their plans to conquer Amril, the goblins were exiled to the extreme north for their ugly appearance. They had gone completely extinct after thousands of years. As for the alchemy the goblins founded, part of it was also passed down to the future generations. Although the High Elves would never admit it, they had indeed employed a lot of technology created by the goblins when they constructed the sky castles. The alchemy colossus was considered a high-end war machinery during the goblins' era. It was created from the remains of magical beasts and magical metals. Dependent on magical crystals as the source of energy, the numerous alchemy arrays were like the soul of the alchemy colossus. Apart from employing the alchemy colossus to make physical attacks, the alchemy array could convert the mana within its magical crystal into different types of spells, and attack the enemies with magic. The alchemy colossuses played a great role in making up for the goblins' deficiencies. If one were to compare the abilities of mages with an alchemy colossus, it could be said that the latter had the ability of an archmage. During the peak of the goblins' era, a Titan-level alchemy colossus had similar status with the ancient dragons and giant titans. Unfortunately, despite being the founders of magic machinery, the goblins did not have the ability to create many alchemy colossuses of the Titan level. Otherwise, they would not have been eliminated by the High Elves. If a human wished to create a Titan-level alchemy colossus, he had to be a divine smith. The greatest strength of humans was the ability to learn. Despite the rapid development of magic civilization, humans did not let the goblins' advancement in magic machinery be buried in the dust of history. However, due to the great amount of skills that were lost with the fall of the goblins and High Elves, there was still a difference when humans studied the alchemy colossus. One of the most significant areas was the requirement for the user of the alchemy colossus to be at least a magic shooter. Yet, in the goblins' era, the goblins did not need to learn any magic to use it. The controlling of the alchemy colossus was like how any common man could learn to drive a vehicle. Not to exaggerate, even if it was a Titan-level alchemy colossus, as long as one got the permission, any goblin would be able to control it well. However, human potential in the field of magic was gradually discovered after a few magic tides. As magic became a key focus of human study, magic civilization officially entered a period of rapid development. Hence, the alchemy colossus that was easy neither to pilot nor create was gradually given up by humans. Oh, yes. I bet you don't know what the alchemy colossus is, Jirian said as he thought of Lin Li's experiences, and decided to take on the role of a mentor. It's no wonder that you don't. Before this, I've only read about and not seen a real alchemy colossus. This alchemy colossus is actually just like what you said, the alchemy colossus is at least 10 meters tall, and has the combat energy of an archmage. I wonder if you still remember any other specific information. Were there obvious symbols on the alchemy colossus, or unique characteristics in the alchemy array? Lin Li interrupted him immediately. He gave no room for Jirian to boast using his knowledge. Jirian was lost for words. Bastard, do you think you are going to die if you let me show off some of my knowledge? I didn't see any markings. As for the alchemy array, what characteristic could it have? It was just very messy. Forget it, it was as good as Jirian remaining silent. Lin Li knew that it would be impossible for a layman like Jirian to spot the patterns within the alchemy array. Forget it, I will go and take a look myself when I have the chance. It had been some time since Lin Li arrived in the mainland of Amril, but he had yet to see a real alchemy colossus. From the day he transmigrated to the Sunset Mountains and met Anduin, then entered Jerosa's Guild of Magic, and established the Tower of Dusk in the breezy plains. He had traveled to many places. But, he had yet to leave the borders of Felon Kingdom. Although Felon was the first magical kingdom in the mainland of Anrel, it did not have many achievements related to the study and use of the alchemy array. It could be said that the alchemy array had been a forgotten study in Felon Kingdom. The most obvious reason was that it was a kingdom filled with mages, and this made the study of magic orthodox. After all, humans had much greater potential than goblins in the field of magic. They did not have to forego the entire study of magic just to work on its details. The breezy plains was located at the borders of Felon Kingdom, while on the other side was Leaden Kingdom. Although Leaden Kingdom was not as developed in magic as Felon Kingdom, it majored in the study of magic, and put no importance on the study of the alchemy array. In reality, few people in the entire Anrel would want to engage in the study anymore. Who would want to study that thing nowadays? Lin Li understood it very well. The 4 alchemy colossuses the sire bandits had were definitely not the relics of the goblins. It was a fact that the goblins were not even half the height of humans, and were even diminutive as compared to the dwarfs that majored in smithing. Hence, humans would never be able to fit in the driver's seat of the alchemy colossuses that were created by goblins. Not only that, Lin Li absolutely did not believe there would be anyone in the sire bandits who had the ability to modify the goblins' alchemy colossuses to fit a human inside. After all, that was the alchemy colossus, and not something the alchemy mechanical beasts or alchemy puppets could be compared to. Although many kingdoms in the mainland of Anrel prioritized the study of magic, I've heard a particular kingdom that invested a significant amount of energy in the field of alchemy array, Jirian said as he stroked his non-existent beard. Is that so? Tell me more, Lin Li replied with interest. It is said that the Rotterdam kingdom is situated in the region where the goblins had lived. They had discovered a great number of relics from the goblins' era before. Jirian did not forego any opportunity to show off his knowledge. His 2 plump lips did not stop moving. I heard that Rotterdam Kingdom had always been doing related research into it, and has already succeeded in manufacturing their own alchemy colossus and employed it in their military. Wait, does that mean the Rotterdam Kingdom is supporting the Sire Bandits? Jirian was not the only one in disbelief. Although the Sire Bandits was a famous organization in the breezy plains, it was a bandit association, after all. Geographically, it made the most sense for Leaden Kingdom to support them if there were to be any intervention from any external force. Tell me what you know about Rotterdam Kingdom. Lin Li prompted Jirian. He was really keen to know more about the place. If a kingdom on the mainland of Anrel would want to study the alchemy colossus, it would be possible for the Sire Bandits to do it as well. It was rare for Lin Li to have something he did not know of. Jirian forgot the unhappiness he'd felt previously, and continued to splat his saliva with excitement as he started to introduce Rotterdam to Lin Li. This Rotterdam kingdom is situated in the north of the mainland, and more than half of its land is covered in snow all year round. Hence, it is called the Land of Eternal Frost. Of course, most of its citizens are living in the southern part of Rotterdam, where it is relatively warmer. On the west of Rotterdam is the Dwarf Kingdom, and I heard that both kingdoms are on very good terms with each other since the Dark Age ended. The Rotterdam Kingdom provided many rare resources for the Dwarf Kingdom. This not only included crops, but also magical technology and its products. Similarly, the Dwarf Kingdom helped Rotterdam forge quality weapons and armor, as well as provided them with rare magical minerals. It could be said that the two kingdoms are role models for an establishment of mutually beneficial relationship. Speaking of the strength of the Rotterdam Kingdom. Maybe you will not believe it, but according to various estimates, the Rotterdam Kingdom should rank third in power among the countries in the mainland of Anrel. Yet, despite having such a formidable strength, Rotterdam had never entered any disputes with the other kingdoms on the mainland ever since the end of Dark Age, and no one knows why. It was as though they had zero interest in the other territories. The only conflict it intervened in was when the Dwarf Kingdom got invaded. The Rotterdam Kingdom sent their troops to the aid, and it was said an alchemy colossus was part of the team. But, this is just hearsay, and not from the official historical records. Oh? It seems that this Rotterdam kingdom is really low-key, Lin Li commented casually. That's right, low-key is the word. They were low-key to the point that many people from other kingdoms would never hear that there is such a kingdom existing on the mainland. Jirian took a sip of water before ending his speech helplessly. I only know this much. Lin Li shook his head after hearing it. To be honest, anyone would be able to acquire such information easily from books. But, according to Jirian's words, the 4 alchemy colossuses from the Sire Bandits might be closely related to the Rotterdam kingdom. After all, alchemy colossuses were considered high-level magic machinery during the Goblins' era. No one could recreate them just by conducting some simple research. The production of an alchemy colossus required high-quality machinery and forging techniques, which conditions could be easily met with the relationship between Rotterdam and the Dwarf Kingdom. Lin Li really could not think of any other kingdom in the mainland of Amril which could create an alchemy colossus. He was also extremely curious why Rotterdam would provide aid to the Sire Bandits. Forget it, I will make it a point to see the alchemy colossus myself. Let's talk about how the battle went. Since the power of the alchemy colossus is comparable to an archmage, I presume that our mages had no trouble dealing with it? Lin Li stopped thinking about the relationship between Rotterdam Kingdom and the alchemy colossus, and directed his attention to the team's battle information. It'd be good if there were only 4 alchemy colossuses. That big guy was so dumb. As long as we strategize, they would be done for. After I brought the men for a temporary retreat, I managed to lure them into a trap. But, just when I was about to smash those big guys, 10 freaking level 18 archmages appeared out of nowhere. God damn it, if I had had such a force, I would have swept Gerosis clean, Jirian said affectedly. If he had had 10 archmages, how would he have let the Shadow's Nest attack his Gerosis? Being a guild president, the fact that his guild was always looked down on just because of its geographical location made Jirian very embarrassed. What? There were 10 level 18 archmages? Lin Li exclaimed in shock. Although Jirian was standing in front of him as a breathing man, Lin Li could not help but feel concerned for him. Not to mention a broken guild like in Gerosis, few strong guilds of magic or families in the whole Felon Kingdom would have the ability to defeat 10 level 18 archmages. If Lin Li had not been generous in equipping his mages with all the armor and weapons, they would have been blasted into pieces by those archmages. I've confronted them many times enough to be sure that I've seen them correctly. Do you think it was easy for me to hold up the 4 alchemy colossuses and 10 archmages? Jirian said with lingering fear. The opponents felt like 14 archmages, after all, so you had many exchanges with them? How was the casualty rate? Why didn't you retreat? Lin Li asked doubtfully. Since they had a great difference in power, why did Jirian choose to stay? He knew Jirian was not a rigid person. Don't worry. I know that you lack manpower, and that makes it seem like your actions are mere harassment. Look, the good thing is that we are all alive. I did not call for retreat as I realized they appear to be preparing for something. Especially the 10 archmages, they would only appear when we got close to the bandits' nest. It was as though they were busy with something, and could not leave far. Otherwise, they would have driven us out of the Dragon Mountains. What could be the matter that would occupy the 10 archmages? Lin Li thought about how the Sire Bandits dug something out of the church in Black Cloud's town. Could the archmages be protecting that treasure? But, what treasure could it be? I'll ask the people from the Manhwa directly when they come over. After hearing the updates on his guild, Lin Li left the tent with Jirian. As the president of the guild, as well as the owner of the Tower of Dusk, it was only natural for him to go and have a look at the condition of his men. At least 3 months had passed since he was away from the guild. He noticed some new faces in the Tower of Dusk, but knew that there was still no one with outstanding abilities. President Felix, let me introduce the new people to you. That was Gavin, whose role in Tower of Dusk was like a majordomo's. Although he had no official duty, he took charge of most of the matters. There was an addition of 13 new members in Tower of Dusk over the 3 months Lin Li was away. However, the most able among them was only a level 14 magic shooter, while the less able ones were two magic shooters who had just reached level 10. It couldn't be helped, since the Guild of Magic had just been established in the breezy plains, and the stronger mages had all been attracted by the other forces long ago. If not for Basil's introduction, Lin Li would have to bring a group of people under level 10 on all of his missions. It would be like a child playing around then. Gavin was a level 16 archmage, and was considered the strongest mage after the president. Of course, that was excluding Basil, who was the head referee of the guild. After them would be Alan. He had just quit his habit of being a miser with mana, and successfully become a level 15 archmage. The rest of the people were mostly magic shooters of level 10 to level 13, but it was still considered a significant force after being equipped with quality gear. At this time, the new members of the Tower of Dusk were all looking at their young president. Although they had all heard that their president was a young man, they only knew how outdated they were when they saw the president in person. Usually, a young guild president would be around 40 to 50 years of age. None of them had imagined that he would look so young. Of course, despite the fact that their president was really young, no one dared to doubt his ability. Although the existing members did not tell them his age to prevent people from provoking the president, they'd frequently tell them how terrifying his powers were. After meeting the new members, he went to visit the injured members with Gavin, and had a cordial chat with them. Lin Li tried to understand the details of their injury and asked them if they had any problems and difficulties. Then, he reassured them to focus on the treatment and wished them a speedy recovery. It was a blessing none of them had been severely injured despite having faced 4 alchemy colossuses and 10 level 18 archmages. After visiting the wounded, Lin Li took out some healing potions and instructed Gavin to hand them to the others. The sight of the healing potions changed the expressions of the new members. Healing potions were very different from vulnerary. The latter had very general and basic functions like treating inflammation and clotting blood. The healing potions, however, were considered high-level magical potions that could rapidly heal injuries. Things that could be used to save lives were usually not cheap. One such healing potion could be sold from 8,000 to up to 1 million gold coins in the market. But, this young president not only gave the potions to them, but also did it without any sign of hesitation, despite the hefty price. This won the favor of new members by a lot. "Mr. President, your tent has been prepared. You may take a rest now," Gavin said as he went back to Lin Li after he distributed the healing potions. "Yeah. Let's go," Lin Li replied gently, and followed Gavin to the tent. "Mr. President, feel free to call me if you have any needs," said Gavin respectfully. When he first entered the Tower of Dusk through Basil, he had thoughts of supplanting the young president, yet he did not dare to entertain such thoughts anymore. He was present in the Blackstone Mountains when he first saw the young level 19 archmage use his powers. Now that he was back, Gavin could feel a stronger power within the young president. Gavin could hardly imagine what could be stronger than a level 19 archmage. Mr. President was only 20 years old. 20 years old. That night, the young and mysterious president was the main topic in discussions of all the guild members. No one dared to belittle him for his young age. The existence of the young president gave everyone ample confidence in themselves and the future of the Tower of Dusk. It had been some time since Lin Li had a good rest. He remembered it had been nearly 4 months since he'd last slept in his tent in the Blackstone Mountains. This time, despite being dangerously close to the enemies, he felt extremely carefree when he slept. Lin Li took an extremely long rest. He slept for 3 days and 3 nights. It was not that he was lazy, but that his mental strength had been greatly depleted from his journey to the abyss of Tharlan. Using Kenora's ancient demonic runes had consumed a great amount of his mental strength. If it had been other people, their brain would have burst. It was noon when Lin Li woke up. When he wanted to get some food, he saw Gavin standing outside his door. It seemed that Gavin wanted to look for him. "Hey, Mage Gavin. When did you arrive? What's the matter?" "Mr. President, Hutton from the Manhwa family is waiting outside the campsite. He is looking for you." Gavin had an unusual expression. He did not know that Lin Li had sent an invitation to the Manhwa family. Gavin knew about the tension the president had with the family. Hence, he felt very confused when he saw Hutton extremely polite when he brought his men over. "Yeah, it's all right. I sent Beckley to the Manhwas to request assistance," said Lin Li casually. But Gavin still could not regain his composure. That was the Manhwa family, one of the top forces of the breezy plains. How would the young master of the family personally attend to the president's request just because of a letter? Lin Li did not care what was on Gavin's mind. Leave him alone for the time being. Bring me my lunch. Why yes, Mr. President, Gavin replied after a short pause. But, thinking of how his president was treated by the Manhwas, Gavin thought that it was only right for them to leave Hutton hanging for a while. Hutton and a few of his followers were standing in front of the entrance of the campsite. It had been some time since he sent the message of his arrival, yet there was no more response from the campsite. He did not see their president anywhere, either. "Sir Hutton, they are too rude. How could they let you wait here when they are the ones who summoned us?" One of the followers sulked with a great sense of injustice. "That's right. Sir Hutton, why don't we return to the campsite first?" another follower asked. "Shut up, we will wait here silently," Hutton snapped at the two followers in a low voice. Finally, after some time, a burly mage with the build of a warrior came out of the campsite. "I suppose you must be Mage Hutton from the Manhwa family. Our president is waiting inside. Please follow me in," the mage said to Hutton. That made Hutton's followers very indignant. This was the first time they saw anyone treat the Manhwa family like that. Not only did they not wait at the door for the arrival of the young master, they also sent no one to greet him. Now, did they just let a servant call them in? Who did they think they were? The two men looked at their master expectantly. They were waiting for Hutton's order so they could dash into the campsite. They were so prepared to bring that darn president before Hutton for an apology. But they did not expect the arrogant young master to take a step back. "Oh, sure. I'd trouble you to bring me there then," said Hutton politely. Hutton got increasingly shocked as he entered the campsite behind Gavin. Since the Tower of Dusk had only been established less than half a year ago, Hutton had not expected to see the campsite and mages to be so different from his expectations. He knew how great the young President Felix was. But, he just could not believe his eyes. The moment he entered the campsite, he looked at the arrangement of the different facilities. Although it was a temporary campsite, it had a simple arrangement that was extremely orderly and well-planned. Hutton was a clever man. He could tell that the scattered formation of the tents had the ability to counter large-scale magical attacks and provide great support to one another in emergency. What surprised Hutton the most was the mages from the Tower of Dusk. Mages had incredibly high social status in this world. Hence, it made most of them very complacent and lacking discipline and respect for others. It was the same for the mages in the Manhwa family. They would feel very insulted if they were asked to train their battle formation like the warriors. Yet, the mages in the Tower of Dusk reminded Hutton of a group of well-trained warriors, despite their differing magic abilities. He even felt that the elites in his family might not even have much chance of winning if they were to challenge this group of mages. The main reason was not that the mages in Tower of Dusk had great abilities, but Lin Li's willingness to invest heavily in them. Lin Li's action made them feel that they needed the Tower of Dusk, and not the other way round. Hence, in order not to be given up by the Tower of Dusk, they had to put an effort to adapt to their rules. Unlike them, mages and local forces such as the Manhwa family were hired and paid. These forces did their best to accommodate them for fear that they would quit and join other forces if they were unhappy with their treatment. How would they dare to let them participate in training just like warriors? It couldn't be their lack of competency either. To Hutton, although none of those mages other than that monstrous president could impress him, all of them were at least level 10. Together, they would be a significant force that couldn't be ignored. Although a team made up entirely of mages was not something to be amazed with, what about the military-style discipline they had? Then, Hutton suddenly realized another difference between the mages in the Tower of Dusk and his own families. Each of the mages here was wearing and using high-level magical equipment which his family could not bear to give their employees. To them, only the core team of the family had the right to own these items. Even the elites he'd brought along only had a few pieces of normal magical equipment. Damn it. Could it be that there was a sale going on at the stores recently? Look at those magic robes. That magic staff. And that jewelry. Hutton felt a little resentful when he looked back at the status of the elites of the Manhwa family. They were like poor beggars relative to the people in the Tower of Dusk. Hutton was even thinking if he should think of a way to ensure that his men did not meet the mages in the Tower of Dusk. Otherwise, they would be fighting to enter the Tower of Dusk before completing their mission. Hutton had mixed feelings when he followed Gavin to Lin Li's tent. Gavin gestured to Hutton to wait outside as he entered to notify Mr. President of Hutton's arrival. Then, Gavin came out of the tent. "Mage Hutton, our president would like to invite you in." Hutton smiled as he nodded his head and walked towards the tent. This time, one of the followers sped in front of Hutton. He reached out his arms to help Hutton open the entrance of the tent. But, his arms were blocked by Gavin. "Our president only invited Hutton in," Gavin reminded sternly. "You!" Hutton's follower shouted. He was enraged. "How rude! Why is the host not yet out to receive us?" He felt that it was as if the darn president was calling the young master of Manhwa like a servant. Since Hutton really wanted to butter up to Lin Li and the Tower of Dusk, how would he care to haggle over such trifles with them? Hutton waved his arms at his men. "You two, return first. Tell them no one is to leave the campsite without my orders." Initially, Hutton had plans for his men to wait outside the tent. But, he feared the two men might wreak havoc in the campsite of the Tower of Dusk. The followers of the Manhwa family were oblivious of the conversation that happened in Sorensen's study. One of the reasons was to protect the pride of the family, and the other was out of fear that the leakage of the secret might trigger that young president. Juresco's 3 relics were extraordinary. If one revealed they had a new owner, it would create a commotion. Then, the Manhwa family would be the first to get into trouble. Hutton could not explain his concerns to his men. All he could do was to give them orders so they minimize any interaction with the people in the Tower of Dusk. Without interaction, there would be no conflict. Hutton's gave them an extremely wise command. But, many a time, people were affected by their so-called common sense. Who would think highly of a 20-year-old president and a guild of magic which was incapable of dealing with the leftovers of the Sire bandits? Lin Li had just finished his meal when Hutton entered. He gestured at the seat beside him, and said smilingly, "I didn't expect you to be here so early, Mage Hutton. Hee, as a force of the breezy plains, it is our utmost responsibility to deal with the bandits affecting the stability and peace of our region. Hence, I've mobilized the elites of my family immediately as soon as I received your message. We have traveled here at twice our usual speed to assist you. Hope we would be of help in the operation to eliminate the bandits," Hutton replied ingratiatingly the moment he sat down. "Bullsh *T, I'd be a moron if I were to believe your fanciful words. Weren't you in cahoots with the Sire bandits before this?" Despite his natural distrust in Hutton's words, Lin Li did not expose Hutton directly. "Then I shall trouble you, Mage Hutton. I believe that the elites of the Manhwa family have to be extraordinarily strong." "You are too kind with your words. I've seen for myself how capable your men are as well." "I'm really envious of you," Hutton responded flatteringly. The 2 men Hutton had brought along, Yerrick and Waldo, turned towards the exit of the camp without giving Gavin a second look. Both of them were outstanding figures in the team of mages under the Manhwa family. Their capability was similar to that of Amanda's, and they were both level 16 archmages. They would have the ability to eliminate all the forces in Jurosis and take control of the entire place if they wanted. The 2 men discussed Sir Hutton's unusual behavior as they walked towards the exit. They could not understand why Hutton had to be so cautious with this newly established guild. As the first heir to the Manhwa family, Hutton was quite an esteemed man in the breezy plains. "Hey, look at that." Yerrick suddenly stopped in his tracks. He gestured to Waldo with his elbow. Waldo looked in the direction Yerrick was signaling him to. He saw a plump mage teaching a youth mage apprentice in one of the empty fields in the campsite. The scene was hilarious to both men. They could not believe a man in his 20s would still be a mage apprentice. They thought it had to be either the young man's lack of potential or the failure of that plump mage. The fatso in the campsite of the Tower of Dusk would naturally be Jirian. Meanwhile, the youth mage apprentice who had been terribly reprimanded was Garso, the son of old Salat. Despite all the lashings Jirian gave his student, it was a fact that he really treasured Garso. This was not only due to Jirian's relationship with old Salat, but also his recognition of the bit of potential Garso had for learning magic. The death of his father caused by the Sire bandits motivated Garso to put in more effort into learning magic. He was driven to avenge his father. It was indeed ridiculous to still be a mage apprentice at this age, but it was a fact that Garso had progressed close to level 5 in just a few months of practice. He would be a real mage when he reached level 5. However, although Garso had good potential in magic, he started too late. This would put a limit to what he could achieve in the future as well. After all, old Salat was just an old blacksmith in Black Cloud's town. He struggled to make ends meet with his business. How would he have the ability to let his son learn magic? Furthermore, mages were considered divine in the eyes of common men. Many people would never dare to wonder whether they could attain that seemingly unattainable status of a mage. How would Yarrick and Waldo know Garso's background? To them, it was as if they were watching a lowly mentor educating a lowly student. They ridiculed the stark contrast in body size between the mentor and student. Huh. So this is the standard of the Tower of Dusk? It is no wonder that they had no ability to fight the Sire bandits. I think that apprentice would be better off being a bandit, ridiculed Yarrick gloatingly. He made no effort in lowering his volume. To him, it would not matter if the other party could hear him. What could possibly happen if they did? Their president was in need of the Manhwa family, not the other way around. Moron, Jirian muttered under his breath. As the president of his guild of magic, his hearing had been perfected from listening in on all the gossips of himself between his men. His sense of hearing was so sharp that even the sneezing of a mosquito would never escape Jirian's ears. However, he was too lazy to care about Yarrick. He treated Yarrick's gloating as a dog's barking on the streets. Unfortunately, the two men who Jirian did not feel like giving attention to had nowhere to vent their pent-up anger. How would they give up on any opportunity to ridicule the Tower of Dusk? Yarrick took a few steps forward. He waved his magic staff and sized Garso up with a belittling expression. Then, he turned to look at Waldo. Some mage apprentice for life just cannot understand the reality, and thinks that magic is for everyone. The worst part is not the student, but the deceitful mentor that sacrifices the future of his student for his personal interests. Haha, that's right. Isn't that a really fantastic bandit material? To be able to continue to deceive a 20-odd years old person into learning magic, the Tower of Dusk really has all sorts of talents. Waldo chimed in. As somebody who had experience in living independently, even if Garso did not mind being made fun of, how would he be willing to let people mock his mentor? He glared at the two men and lashed out at them. Who are you to talk bad about my mentor? Listen carefully. My mentor is the president of Jirosa's Guild of Magic. It had only been a few months since Garso started learning magic. As the priority for him was to focus on his study, Jirian would never bother telling him any other information unrelated to magic. Hence, it was not unusual for him to be unfamiliar with the happenings in the mage industry. To him, since magic guilds were organizations that mages attended, then guild presidents would naturally be the people who led the mages. There wouldn't be any other people who could be more capable than the president of a magic guild. Jirosis? Where is that? Why have I not heard about that place? Waldo, do you know Jirosis? This person is actually the president of the Jirosis Guild of Magic. Yarrick jeered. He really had zero respect for the guild president of a countryside like Jirosis. God damn it, scram if you have finished your piece. I don't have the responsibility to educate you bastards. That is the duty of your parents, Jirian snapped in disapproval. Jirian's words enraged Yerrick. As a level 16 archmage, he had not been scolded by such a country bumpkin before. You darn fatso. Whom are you scolding? Yerrick shouted in agitation. Idiot, Jirian remarked. His temperament had allowed him to filter out people of lowly moral standards. I will be responsible for teaching my own student. It is not going to help if you continue with your crap at the side, Jirian continued speaking after he rolled his eyes. He still did not give them any attention. Teaching your student? Haha. You are the one full of crap. I presume that this mage apprentice is in his 20s, Yerrick retorted, and sized Jirian up arrogantly. It is no wonder that your president would be requesting help from the Manhwa family just to deal with those several bandits. You good for nothing. Garso felt extremely awkward. He felt that he had not only ruined the reputation of the Tower of Dusk, but also embarrassed mentor Jirian. No matter what the reason was, the fact that he was a mage apprentice in his 20s was not something glorious to talk about. Is that so? Jirian glanced at Yerrick. He said nothing as he walked towards him emotionlessly. Then, down came a tight slap on Yerrick's face. Yerrick held his hand to his cheek in shock and exclaimed, You. His gaze fixed on Jirian was filled with disbelief. How could this fatso slap him before the eyes of so many people? What do you want to say exactly? Jirian rolled his eyes again. Although I had told you that I did not wish to educate you on behalf of your parents, I did not tell you that it'd be the same if you were to trigger me. Yerrick's face flushed with color. He started to recite a spell hurriedly. The red magical crystal on his magic staff became unusually bright. But, Yerrick quickly noticed his failure to gather his mana. Then, he saw about 20 to 30 mages from the Tower of Dusk circling around him when he lifted his head again. The mages of the Tower of Dusk were not devout people. They had done all sorts of malicious deeds ever since they had started to follow their wicked and ruthless president. Not to mention that their opponents were a group of mages from the Manhwa family, so what if they came from the Glittergold trade union? The mages from the Tower of Dusk would not care as much when it was time to act. They only knew to unleash all their spells before finding time for other matters. Furthermore, who was Jirian? He was the most unique existence in the Tower of Dusk, a man whom even the president of the tower showed tremendous respect. It was said that Mr. President knew Jirian when he was still a low-level mage. Who would be able to deal with the rage of Mr. President if anything were to happen to Jirian? The atmosphere in the campsite turned extremely tense. The two forces that were supposed to be battling side by side became like two bulls that were glaring at each other with their red eyes filled with enmity. Fortunately, it was just tension. Although both parties were filled with anger, they were not void of reason. Both of them knew that no one would benefit if they were to start a fight. The people in the Magic Guild knew that although their president frequently smiled and was usually gentle, he would be more frightening than an enraged WYRM if he were to get angry. It was the same for the Manhwa family. There was no guarantee that they would be able to defeat the dozen of magic shooters from the Tower of Dusk. Apart from that, before setting off, Hutton had made it clear that they were not to start any gunfire easily. At the same time, the conversation in the tent was going on very pleasantly. We have 6 archmages, 2 of them level 16 and 4 of them level 15. For magic shooters, 6 of them are level 14, while the other 26 of them are level 12 and level 13. Hutton was telling Lin Li of the ability of the team he had brought along with him. He was trying his best to portray the sincerity of the family in the partnership. Yeah, sounds good. The Manhwa family is really powerful, Lin Li commented, and nodded his head. Hutton quickly replied, President Fellick, you are too kind to say that. I've met the mages in the Tower of Dusk. They are the real elites. Hee, Lin Li smiled and waved his hands. He thought of the reason why he'd invited the Manhwa family. Oh yes, Hutton. Other than inviting the Manhwa family to participate in our operation to eliminate the nest of the bandits this time, I have a question to ask as well. Lin Li's speech was interrupted when Gavin pulled the entrance of the tent open and dashed in anxiously. Mr. President, there is trouble outside. The two mages from the Manhwa family and mage Jirian got in a fight. Gavin was an honest man. But there were instances that honest men would lie as well. There was no fight happening outside. It was just the old man Jirian giving people a tight slap. Yet, this was a common sight. The mages in the Tower of Dusk had always been sickly biased toward their own people. It did not matter who was at fault. As long as their own people were involved, their first instinct was to fight it out with magic. This could not be helped when their president was somebody who was the best in siding with his people. Mr. President had the most ridiculous reaction. What happened? Did the old man injure himself? The concerned president asked. He had stood up the moment he heard Gavin speak. Despite being by the young president's side for such a long time, and being used to seeing the president cover up for various faults, the president's question gave Gavin an urge to puke blood at his obvious act of being partial to their guild of magic. Instead of asking about the reason behind the fight, his president was actually asking about that old man. And the old man was the one let Manhwa's mage lose his teeth with a single slap. Fortunately, Hutton did not have that much time to think about the problem with Lin Li's attitude. Gavin's words triggered him. God damn it, didn't I let the two morons return first? How did they start a fight? I should not have brought the two idiots over. Damn it, do they know who our partner is? Is that someone we can offend? Our partner is somebody who could easily eliminate 300 men from the ruthless Sire bandits in a single sneak attack. Are the two fools here to dig a pit for the Manhwa family? Nope, they are in a deadlock now. Lin Li felt better after knowing that Jirian was not injured. Mage Hutton, should you go and take a look with us? He turned towards Hutton. Of course, of course. I'm terribly sorry. My people are not sensible enough. I'll definitely punish them when I return, Hutton replied in relief. He knew the alliance could be secure as long as his men did not injure Jirian. The two subordinates did not matter to him anymore. It's a small matter, Lin Li waved his arms. A little punishment will do. Please do not use any tortures on them, for they are two living people, after all. It is not easy to have lived to this age, he said casually. Gavin nearly choked on his saliva. He knew that the young president would win the award for being the most shameless mage of the breezy plains. Lin Li took Hutton's attempt to be polite for granted. It was as though it was the fault of the Manhwa families and no one else's. My dear Mr. President, the cheeks of the two living men are already swollen from Jirian's slap. The three men got to the scene very quickly. They saw the mages of the Tower of Dusk in a circle, and inside the circle were Jirian, Garso, and the two mages from the Manhwa family. Wow, I didn't know that the people of the Tower of Dusk are not only impolite, but also shameless villains. What do you guys want? To besiege your ally? Yerrick said as he laughed coldly. Pat. Yerrick suddenly felt a hard kick on his back. He had to stumble a few steps forward to maintain his balance. After regaining his posture, Yerrick turned back and glared behind him. He wanted to see who was the shameless man who dared to attack him from the back. But, his angry glare turned into a fearful gaze when he locked eyes with Sir Hutton. Sir Hutton had a glare so cold it could freeze even air. Why, young master? What brings you here? Waldo stuttered. He did not expect Hutton to be here. Did you forget what I just told you? Hutton said coldly. He swept his gaze over the two men. Other than frustration, there was a sense of helplessness. He just realized the mages in the Tower of Dusk were really obedient as compared to the Manhwas. Sir Hutton, they were too rude. How could they show such a strong attitude when they were the ones begging for our assistance? They are acting as if we owe it to them. Yerrick retorted defiantly. What **t are you talking about? Since when did I tell you they begged for our aid? But, you are right to say that we owe it to them. Hutton stole a quick glance at Lin Li awkwardly. He only felt a little relieved when he saw that the young president did not display any sign of unhappiness. However, he could not allow his men to continue to speak any more nonsense. All right, enough is enough. this matter had been approved by the elders of the family, and I know what I'm doing. Both of you just need to follow my instructions without any questions. I want you to apologize to Mage Jirian and his student right now, chided Hutton affirmatively. Yerrick and Waldo stole a glance at each other and saw extreme disbelief and dismay in each other's eyes. Their inferiority to Lin Li required them to follow Hutton's orders. They apologized to Jirian and Garso unwillingly. Please do not let this happen again. Go back and remind the others about this, or else I will make you pay for it. Hutton lashed at them angrily. Noted, Sir Hutton, the two men replied with their heads down. Mage Felix, what do you think? Hutton asked Lin Li cautiously. Lin Li did not want to make things difficult for the men who had already lowered their status so greatly. Mage Hutton, since you have dealt with this matter, I think we can continue our previous conversation. Read more chapter on 6 novel. To be honest, Hutton's rage came from the trouble caused by the two men. However, he would not have dared to give the two level 16 archmages any physical punishment. He looked at Jirian and Garso apologetically before following Lin Li back into the tent. When they were back, it was as if nothing had happened. Lin Li let Hutton return to his seat and resumed the conversation on a serious note. Mage Hutton, I have a question, and I need you to tell me the truth. I suspect that this matter is related to the Sire Bandit's transformation. Sure, please ask freely, Hutton replied very sincerely. He was relieved that the two rascals did not waste his previous efforts of buttering up to the president. Mage Hutton, you might have thought that my plan of eliminating the Sire Bandits was only launched after my return, said Lin Li. He did not raise his question immediately, but decided to tell Hutton of his reasons. Oh, is that not the case? Hutton asked, curiously. Lin Li shook his head. In fact, this operation against the Sire Bandits has started 2 months ago. It was led by the president of the Jurosis Guild of Magic, Jirian. He brought the mages from the Tower of Dusk to the Dragon Mountains. That's because we had allowed for the time we would need to locate their nest. Hutton felt even more curious. He had seen the abilities of the mages from the Tower of Dusk himself. If what President Felix said was true, why did the operation drag on for such a long time? Hutton frowned. Could it be that there are still powerful people in the remains of Sire Bandits? You have had interactions with the Sire Bandits. Do you know if they own any alchemy colossus? Lin Li had been stunned when Jirian had broken the news to him. Hence, he was determined to surprise Hutton as well. As expected, Hutton was stupefied by Lin Li's words. He gaped, and Lin Li could see his lips trembling. President Felix, what did you just say? Did I hear it wrongly? Did you just mention the alchemy colossus? Did you mean that the Sire Bandits own an alchemy colossus? That's right. They have 4 alchemy colossuses. I'm sure Mage Hutton understands what that means. Lin Li smiled. He was satisfied with Hutton's response. Hutton was in extreme disbelief. While the ability of an alchemy colossus was comparable to an archmage's, their combat energy was actually more powerful. How would such treasures end up in the hands of the Sire Bandits? Vansgore did not tell him about the alchemy colossuses at all. Hutton frowned even harder. He looked at Lin Li doubtfully. President Felix, I've seen the strength of your team. Although I'm not sure how the Sire Bandits acquired the alchemy colossuses, I doubt you would take more than 2 months to wrestle with them. What if there were 10 more level 18 archmages? Lin Li asked enviously. He knew that if the Tower of Dusk were to have a team of 10 level 18 archmages, no other force in the breezy plains would dare to speak loudly in front of his tower. However, his envy did not last. The thought that he could create the rune potion from the dragon's tongue he acquired in the Blackstone Mountains reaffirmed Lin Li of the potential of his tower. The effects of the potion would be absolute. Who knew if he was going to have 10 more archmages from it? The side effect of the rune potion was very obvious. The consumption of it would end all possibilities of further advancement in the field of magic. Yet, how many mages had the confidence that they had the ability to become an archmage in the course of their lives? There were too many magic shooters stuck at the gate of level 14 for life. Lin Li was certain that no one would reject the potion. But, he would have one condition: loyalty to the Tower of Dusk. What are you saying? Hutton gasped. He knew that his family would never have the ability to gather 10 level 18 archmages. He was also certain that the team would not be the remains of Sire Bandits. Yes. Although I don't know which force the 10 level 18 archmages belong to, I'm sure they are not under the Sire Bandits. But, why would there still be forces behind the Sire Bandits? What are they plotting? Lin Li verbalized his thoughts to Hutton, his fingers tapping on the table gently. That's true. What are they plotting? Hutton was in a daze. The fact that there were 10 level 18 archmages shocked him. Although the Manhwa family had their personal legendary powerhouse, but legendary powerhouses were like nuclear weapons. They were meant to incite fear in their enemies. Unlike them, archmages were like conventional missiles. They really could be used to attack people. This brings me back to the reason behind my decision to raid them. They attacked Black Cloud's town. I presume Mage Hutton is not unfamiliar with this place? I heard that the Sire Bandits dug something out from the underground of the church in Black Cloud's town. Lin Li knocked his fingers against the table twice. He noticed Hutton shivering in fear. Is that so? What was it? Hutton asked with fleeting glances. Lin Li locked his gaze with Hutton's persistently. You should tell me what was hiding beneath the church in Black Cloud's town. Hutton was hesitating. Since there was no hope for him to acquire Juresco's 3 relics, it made it even more important for him to protect the information on that item. However, if he were to hide it from President Felik, the relationship between the Manhwa family and Tower of Dusk would really be damaged. Mage Hutton, no matter what hid beneath the church of Black Cloud's town, it is a fact that it had been dug out by the Sire Bandits or a mysterious force. What's the use of hiding it from me? Lin Li spoke cynically in a flat voice, raising his eyebrows. Hutton shook his head helplessly. He could not help but admit the truth. Since the item had been acquired by other forces, and there was the alliance between his family and the Tower of Dusk, what was the use of concealing the information? It was one of the arms of the immortal king, Hutton replied bitterly. What? Lin Li was prepared to remain composed, no matter how extraordinary the item was. However, he did not expect it to be so fantastical. Hutton had to be joking. How could someone throw the arm of the immortal king in such a random place? Hutton coughed gently. In the battle between the immortal king and the Dragon of Destruction, although the immortal king eventually killed his enemy, he lost one of his arms in the process. He could very well reattach his arm with the power he had. However, no one knows why, but the immortal king did not choose to do so. He ditched that arm on the battlefield, the breezy plains of today. There have to be many people fighting over the arm of the immortal king, Lin Li said as he rubbed his chin. Hutton shook his head. No one knew of this at first. It wasn't until an unforgettable catastrophe happened in the breezy plains that people knew the immortal king had left his arm here. A Death Knight acquired that arm. Lin Li's brows twitched. He thought of the dozen Death Knights under him. They were really troublesome to train. Hutton was oblivious to what was on Lin Li's mind. With the help from the immortal king's arm, that Death Knight became the first Retribution Knight in the whole Amrel. He gathered a group of powerful Death Knights under him very quickly and started a raid on the breezy plains. All living creatures on the land became their enemies. The population of the breezy plains was reduced by more than 1/3 in a mere decade. Even a few cities, including Roland, were turned into ruins. Lin Li had previously had a discussion with Sendros about the Retribution Knight. The Retribution Knight was a legendary Death Knight, and the special thing about the Retribution Knight was that there could only be one Retribution Knight at any point in time. Once a Death Knight became a Retribution Knight, all the other Death Knights would stop evolving and voluntarily come forth to pledge their loyalty to this new Retribution Knight, no matter how far away they had to travel to find it. As these Death Knights became the loyal subjects of the Retribution Knight and stopped evolving, all the power they gained from battles would be transferred to this Retribution Knight so as to help it evolve faster. Hence, every Retribution Knight was scarily powerful, and merely the word legendary was not enough to describe them. Lin Li had recruited a group of Death Knights by chance back in the Scar of Death, and in the eyes of these Death Knights, he was their Retribution Knight. However, Lin Li was not a true Retribution Knight, and thus did not require these Death Knights to stop evolving so as to help him evolve. Thus, there was a very high possibility that he'd be able to groom all these Death Knights into Retribution Knights. Since the Immortal King's arm had created a Retribution Knight before, it might be of help to Lin Li's plan to groom a team of Retribution Knights. The thought of that heightened Lin Li's interest in that Immortal King's arm, hence, he asked Hutton, what happened after that? What about the Retribution Knight and his team of Death Knights? How did the Immortal King's arm end up in a small church in Black Cloud's town? Breezy Plains became a living hell under the tyranny of the Retribution Knight and his team of Death Knights. Hutton looked into the distance with a sigh as he recounted. Then, the last prophet of the brilliant shrine, Lin, came to the Breezy Plains and purified the Retribution Knight and his Death Knights using the holy light, and sealed the Immortal King's arm in the only church in the Breezy Plains, hiding it below the church in Black Cloud's town. Hutton was a skilled storyteller indeed. His poetic account of this secret was so captivating that Lin Li thought he was listening to somebody review a book. However, Lin Li found something strange while listening, so he frowned lightly and said, Mage Hutton, as far as I know, while the Manhwa family is one of the most powerful magical families in the Breezy Plains, it has only been around for about 200 years, and is considered a new family in the Breezy Plains. The Breezy Plains had a long history, and many families and forces of varying sizes had been set up over the years. Just 200 years ago, there was no place for the Manhwa family in the Breezy Plains. The founder of the Manhwa family was an adventurer named Leo Manhwa, who was already at level 18 in his 30s, a genius of his own. When he first stepped out onto the scene of the Breezy Plains, various forces tried to pull him over, but he was a descendant of Juresco's disciples, so how could he be a subordinate to others? Out of respect for his ancestors, Leo Manhwa chose not to serve any force, and set up the Manhwa family by himself. Then, there was another legendary mage in the Manhwa family, Cheyenne, and their standing in the Breezy Plains was firmly locked since then. Hutton paused before he quickly smiled, and humbly said, You flatter us, President Felix. In my opinion, the Tower of Dusk will surely do much better than us, and become the youngest yet most powerful force in the Breezy Plains even though it has only been around for a short while. As he said this, Hutton could not help but lament the fact that he was now the one who had to sing another's praises even though he was used to being on the receiving end of it so far. No doubt there was ample reason he was chosen as the heir of the Manhwa family as he was able to move on quickly. Lin Li waved his hand and laughed. That's not what I was referring to, I just wanted to confirm that the news is accurate. After all, the Manhwa family has only been around for 200 years. And others who have been around for longer do not even know of this. I wonder where you heard this from, Mage Hutton. Oh. This secret was written down in the diary of the ancestor. President Felix, you might recall that our ancestor was once the disciple of Juresco. Hutton could not help his look of pride at the mention of his ancestor. Juresco was the most powerful mage to have ever lived, after all, and he was known as the god of mages. It was such great honor to Hutton that his ancestor was once the disciple of Juresco. While the Immortal King and Juresco lived during different times, Juresco was someone who stood at the peak of the sanctuary realm and was called the god of mages. It was no wonder that he might know of such secrets. Oh, I see. Lin Li nodded before saying, since this is a secret that has been passed on in your family for so long, why hasn't anyone tried to retrieve the Immortal King's arm? Given Juresco's achievements, the arm of the Immortal King was not very beneficial to him, and it was understandable that he never bothered to retrieve it, but why did the Manhwas wait so long after Juresco left? We had no choice, Hutton said with a face of indignation and sighed. We know that we should have got our hands on it sooner too, but Lin was the last prophet of the Brilliant Shrine, and we were unable to break his seal. The only thing we could do was to wait for it to weaken with time. This made sense, Lin Li mused as he secretly observed the expression on Hutton's face while looking nonchalant. He suddenly knocked his knuckles on the table before saying, I get it now, but I have another question. What question? Lin Li smiled, and asked, as far as I know, Master Cheyenne is not well versed in necromagic. Well, Hutton's expression stiffened when he heard this. Lin Li smiled, and said, I remember you said that the arm of the immortal king created a retribution knight, and from this we can see how powerful the death energy in it is. I guess only necromancers would be interested in this arm, right? This was the breezy plains, after all. No matter whether it was the magical kingdom of Felon or the holy kingdom of Ledon, both of them were extremely biased against necromagic. Studying necromagic was akin to seeking one's own death, and even given the Manhwa family's power and influence in the breezy plains, they would never dare commit this taboo. While the Manhwa family had a legendary mage holding their ground, Cheyenne was really not as powerful as one might expect him to be if they considered all the powerful people there were in the whole Anril. Only someone like Sendros, who had legendary powers and was also the high priest of the Darkness Shrine, could research necromagic without any qualms. If the immortal king's arm could create a retribution knight, then the death energy in it had to be incredibly powerful and pure. Lin Li could not think of any use for it besides necromagic. For a powerful family like the Manhwas, the immortal king's arm might be of an impressive origin, yet would not serve any practical purpose. No matter how powerful it was, if it did not have any use, who would dare go against the Tower of Dusk over something worthless? If there was a necromancer or undead creatures amongst the Sire bandits, then it would all make sense, but there were only colossuses and 10 orthodox level 18 archmages in their camp. There was nothing about necromagic, and thus Lin Li had no reason to suspect them. Hutton's gaze was sheepish. After all, there were some temptations that were just too difficult to resist. He was the first heir to the Manhwa family, though, and was above many in terms of his thinking and knowledge. After a moment's hesitation, he said, Forgive me, President Felix, but this concerns a family secret, and I did not disclose everything. Alright, the immortal king's arm's existence is absolutely true, but it is actually also holding on to a powerful magical weapon. Oh. Lin Li smiled and nodded his head. That was it, no matter how much power of death was held in the immortal king's arm, it was of no use to most. The magical weapon, on the other hand. Now that would truly be what attracted others the most. No matter what the magical weapon was, it had to be something extraordinary if it was what the immortal king had used to kill the dragon of destruction. A magical weapon of that caliber had to be irresistible to anyone, and even the Manhwa family would not hesitate to sacrifice the whole Dulan to get their hands on it, much less a small black clouds town. Hutton broke out in a cold sweat as he saw the young President Felix smile while watching him. What is this guy smiling about, and why does his smile look so creepy? Does he think that the Manhwas are involved in this? The first heir of the Manhwa family, breaking out in a cold sweat just because someone was smiling at him ambiguously? Everyone who did not know the context would bellow in laughter upon seeing this, but Hutton did not feel embarrassed at all. After all, this young man was not merely a president of a guild of magic, but also the youngest legendary powerhouse ever in history. This was a matter concerning the survival of the Manhwa family, and it was not at all embarrassing for him to fear a legendary mage. President Felix, the Manhwa family, does covet the immortal king's arm and the magical weapon, but I swear that this has nothing to do with us, Hutton explained with a panicked expression. Hee, you're thinking too much, Mage Hutton. Since you have accepted my invitation, then we are allies, and there must be trust between allies. Lin Li could tell that Hutton was not lying, so he tried to appease Hutton in order to preserve their working relationship. Hutton breathed out a sigh of relief. Having a good relationship with this young president was much more practical than pursuing the mythical magical weapon. He was the youngest legendary mage in history and the holder of 3 of Juresco's relics, as well as the chosen one according to Tutankhamun. All of this suggested that he was a person with endless potential. How the other forces would dream about having such a person as an ally. Why would he want to stand against him? The questions Lin Li had were somewhat answered now. And even though he did not know who the ones supporting the Sire bandits were, at least he knew the root of the issue. Lin Li really hoped that the immortal king's arm and the magical weapon did not fall into the wrong hands. While the ancestor of the Manhwa family did not record what the magical weapon was in his diary, Lin Li could make a guess even though he'd had no idea about it previously. Lin Li had Gavin, who had been standing guard at the entrance, called Jirian over. Since the people of the Manhwa family had arrived and his mages had also recuperated and were in good condition, it was now time to plan an attack on the Sire bandits. President Felix, let the Manhwa family lead the attack, Hutton offered as a show of his sincerity. Even though he had heard Lin Li tell him about the situation with the Sire bandits, and knew that there were alchemy colossuses and archmages, he was not worried. After all, even the few people from the Tower of Dusk had been able to keep them occupied for 2 months. He figured these colossuses and archmages were nothing too difficult to deal with. Thank you, Mage Hutton, Lin Li said with a smile, agreeing to Hutton's offer. Of course, he did not take it seriously, while others might not know how powerful an alchemy colossus was, he knew. Hutton relaxed upon seeing that Lin Li had agreed to it. While it might sound a little harsh, this was a proof of allegiance of some sort, and seeing that Lin Li had agreed to it, it seemed that there was hope that they could improve their relations. Hutton gathered his courage and carefully said, well, President Felix, there are some things that I need to discuss with you. Oh, please go ahead. We are allies. If it is within my power, I will definitely help you. Even though the Manhwas had set him up before, they had now submitted to him, and he did not suffer any loss, hence, Lin Li could not be bothered to be petty. You see, I heard that there is a new batch of potions in Duland that came from the Tower of Dusk. Hence, I would like to ask if you could supply the Manhwa family with some of it, Hutton said as he stared closely at Lin Li's face to observe his expression, ready to change the topic as soon as he noticed something was wrong. After they heard about the new potion in Duland, the Manhwa family could not stop talking about it, as their main fighting power was their mages, and their requirement for potions was naturally an astronomical number. The worst thing was that they might not even be able to obtain the potions they needed even if they could afford it. Lin Li was a generous man to his own people, as evident from the benefits the Tower of Dusk's mages enjoyed. Since the Manhwa family was an ally, but not quite his own people, he could not just offer them the potion without gaining anything in return. Lin Li thought for a moment before he said, I can accede to your request, but as you know, the Tower of Dusk has only been set up for a few months, and I am not very familiar with the breezy plains, which makes it hard for me to gather ingredients needed for potions. I heard that the Manhwas have a plot of land growing many herbs in Moonscar Valley. If you're able to supply me with herbs at base price, then it will save me a lot of trouble, and the supply of potions will be guaranteed. No problem, no problem. Hutton was overjoyed. It was nothing for him to supply herbs at base price, as they did not rely on the profits from selling these herbs. They did not have a pharmacist either, and they would not earn much by selling it to the pharmacists' guild. Hence, it was much more valuable to exchange them for potions from the Tower of Dusk. Alright, then it is set. Once all this ends, we can discuss the details of our business. Lin Li was satisfied with this outcome as well as he thought to himself that the Tower of Dusk really needed to groom a few pharmaceutics apprentices. Ever since they started working with the Glitter Gold Trade Union and the Gilded Rose and potion business, Lin Li had to spend a lot of time making potions. He was without a choice as he had been too much of a perfectionist and spent too much money on the Tower of Dusk. After he returned, Gavin briefed him about the potion business, and as the business did better, the demand for potions grew as well. Even though he still had a lot of stock left, his two partners had already started to sell these potions on a limited basis a month ago. While Lin Li obtained a large amount of wealth from the Throne of Darkness, he could not give up the business just because he had a large reserve. Since the business had to go on, he had to groom a few pharmaceutics apprentices so that he'd have more time to study magic. But he would have to seriously consider whom to groom. If he chose from within the Tower of Dusk, he could be sure about the person's character, but that'd mean that he might not have enough gifted apprentices to groom. He could also get people from the Pharmacist Guild. Surely the two old men would not give him trouble given his reputation. After discussing some details, the two men returned to their tents to rest before they dealt with the Sire bandits the next day. At the crack of dawn, before anyone from the Manhwa family or the Tower of Dusk had woken up, thunderous noise came from afar, and was gradually coming closer. It startled the birds and shook the earth as though the mountains were about to collapse. The strong magical wave shocked the mages from both camps awake as they frantically grabbed their magic staves and rushed outside their tents. Even a fool would know that it was an enemy attack given the situation, but the Manhwas were still puzzled. How could there be such powerful mages among the remaining sire bandits? As they rushed outside and looked up, they saw that the sky above them was covered in dull red fire clouds. The fire clouds continued to churn as the powerful magical wave made every mage quietly gasp in awe. Everyone knew that an unusually strong spell was brewing, and this was not something any single mage was capable of. Boom! A burning meteor fell from the sky in the direction of the two camps, before hundreds more followed, covering the earth in a thick layer as though it was never to end. The booming sounds of explosions sounded again and again, making Lin Li feel as though he was standing in the middle of a battlefield. But then again, the unending fall of the pyroblast meteors was comparable to real cannons. Ripples appeared in the sky above the Tower of Dusk's camp as the invisible magical defense stopped the pyroblast meteors from falling on them. The flying sparks immediately set the surrounding forest on fire, and all they could see was sparks flying everywhere. The fire cast a layer of red on everything, making them feel as though they were standing in a furnace. Chaos broke out in both camps, but in the camp of the Tower of Dusk, the mages were not in panic even though they moved quickly, and they all quieted down after a while. Meanwhile, in the Manhwa family's camp, the mages rushed around like headless chickens and caused a ruckus. From this alone, it was evident that the quality of mages from both camps was different, and Hutton looked over at the other camp with envy in his eyes. "Is it the Sire Bandits?" Lin Li asked from where he stood in front of the tent, seeing as Jirian was not far away. Jirian stood beside Lin Li while looking in the direction of all the noise as he angrily said, "Bloody hell, it must be those bastards from the Sire Bandits. They look greater in numbers now, they must have come in full force. Well, they lost their patience first." Lin Li looked into the distance where the noise and quaking was coming from. That had to be the 4 alchemy colossuses. It was important to be able to remain calm when faced with unexpected situations, as many people would be at a loss when they met an unexpected development. The mages of the Tower of Dusk did not need Gavin or Jirian to shout instructions at them as they quickly quieted down and took their positions. Then, they channeled mana into the magic nodes beneath their feet as they worked together to fend off this violent attack. Hutton's side was a little embarrassing compared to the Tower of Dusk. As nobody knew how powerful the enemy was, they had not set up defense magewiths, thinking that they were facing merely a bunch of bandits. Nobody would have thought that this bunch of supposedly bandits would have the guts to strike first, and so violently too. Without the help of defense magewiths, the mages of the Manhwa family had no choice but to defend against the enemy's attack themselves. While nobody was injured so far, judging from the state they were in, there was no doubt that they'd not last long. Gavin, let the Manhwas in. Lin Li did not wish to see his allies perish so soon. After all, they had yet to make themselves useful. Before long, an ashen-faced Hutton came to Lin Li's side, and gratefully said, "President Felix, thank you. Letting in an outsider during an attack, even an ally, was something dangerous as it came with risks. Firstly, they had to deal with the possibility that their ally might turn against them. After all, there was no telling whether that would happen, as the agreement between allies was not known for being reliable. Secondly, even though an ally could be very loyal, letting them into his camp could disrupt the order and affect his people negatively. There was a reason why people said that one should not fear godly opponents, but rather their foolish teammates. Hence, nobody could blame Lin Li even if he did not allow Hutton and the rest into his camp and watched them perish instead. They had placed themselves in such a situation because of their own stupidity, and others were not obligated to provide any assistance. Of course, Lin Li had a lot of faith in the capability of his men, which was why he offered to let Hutton and the rest in. Besides, Lin Li was a legendary mage, after all, and if they chose to turn against him, it would be impossible for anyone here to stop him from leaving. Hutton was a clever man, and it would not be hard to know what choices he would make in this situation. Regardless of what Lin Li thought, Hutton was immensely grateful to Lin Li for letting his people into his camp, as it showed how much trust he had in Hutton. Lin Li got goosebumps from the way Hutton looked at him, hence, he quickly said, "Mage Hutton, take a rest and let your men join in defending the camp." "Alright, President Felix, just tell them what to do and they will cooperate." After he finished saying that, Hutton called Yerrick over, and told him, "Yerrick, go tell our people that they must listen to the arrangements made by the Tower of Dusk from now on so that we can defend from the enemy attack together." "Yes, young Master Hutton," Yerrick answered, and turned to leave, but not before he shot a look at Lin Li, who stood at the side. Even though the Manhwa family was saved by Lin Li, who let them into his camp, he was still filled with distaste for Lin Li. It was evident from this that this young president was still too naive and childish in the way he thought. How could such a man be the leader of a force? In Yerrick's opinion, there was no way the Breezy Plains Guild of Magic would last with such a president. After Yerrick passed Hutton's words to the mages of the Manhwa family, Gavin immediately sent them to their positions so that they could work alongside those from the Tower of Dusk to hold up the magical defense border together. Given their circumstances, the people from the Manhwa family had to rely on the defense border of the Tower of Dusk's camp to protect themselves, hence, none of them was foolish enough to protest against Gavin's arrangements. When they were setting off, Hutton had already emphasized to his men that they were to lower their stance when dealing with the mages from the Tower of Dusk so as not to offend anyone. However, not many of them followed Hutton's instructions when they met the people from the Tower of Dusk in the Dragon Mountains. As the elites from the magic squad of the Manhwa family, the feeling of superiority had long been embedded in them, and it was hard to change with just a few words from Hutton. This feeling of superiority was even harder to suppress after they saw the strength of the mages from the Tower of Dusk and how shabby their tents and campsite were. Thankfully, Hutton had instructed his men not to leave the campsite so as to prevent them from meeting the other party and coming into conflict. Now that both sides were finally standing together, the people from the Manhwa family had lost all traces of that feeling of superiority. This shabby-looking camp had made use of a magical defense border, something that required a large amount of rare magic ingredients and technology. Meanwhile, their luxurious and comfortable tents had been burnt to ashes now. Superiority? How would the mages of the Manhwa family dare to think of that now? But that was not the end, as they stood with the mages from the Tower of Dusk and saw their magic robes, magic staffs, and magic equipment, and they could not help feeling inferior. Damn it, how could this be? They were a guild that had been around for merely a few months, yet every one of them used equipment that they could only admire through the windows of a shop. If it had been in different circumstances, they would even have thought to steal from them. Hence, the mages of the Manhwa family followed the people from the Tower of Dusk to their job of maintaining the magical defense barrier with a heavy heart. Even though they did not receive prior training in this, they were able to keep up as the task was not complicated for them. All they had to do was to channel their mana into it. The magical defense barrier that loomed over them flickered like a flame in a storm under the attack of various magic spells and seemed to be on the verge of collapsing. However, it recovered after the mages from the Manhwa family joined in, and those who looked on did not feel as nervous as they had before. Perhaps the enemy could tell that the magical defense barrier could not be penetrated so easily, for the pyroblast meteors falling from the sky decreased in number until stopping completely. Without the flames clouding their vision, the magical defense barrier became clear once again, and they could see that the trees around them were still burning as the fire spread, while large plumes of smoke rose into the air. "Disperse the smoke and get ready to counterattack," Jirian commanded the mages awaiting his instructions. A few of the mages heard the command and worked together to cast a gale spell. In an instant, the smoke twisted in the sky before it was sent far away by the strong gale. The sky temporarily turned clear, and everyone could finally see the situation in the sky. They saw 10 mages in black robes hovering in the sky somewhere not far from the campsite, but there was no insignia they could see on their robes. Besides that, their faces were hidden in the dark by the wide-brimmed hats they wore. The only thing that revealed they were archmages were 4 solar spheres revolving around each of them. "President Felix, this must be the 10 archmages you were speaking of." Hutton frowned. He had thought that Felix had been merely trying to get the Manhwa family to confirm their stance using this situation, but now that he was facing these 10 archmages, he realized that things were not as simple as they seemed. The 10 mages in back robes hovered in the air and chanted while their faces remained hidden under their wide-brimmed hats. They waved their magic staffs in the air as all kinds of magic spells rained down upon the camp. This was no simple pyroblast meteor, it was as though they were in a demonstrative class as all kinds of advanced magic was shown. It was a flame one moment, and then lightning, before it was followed by a blizzard. It was not easy to retaliate at all. The saying "one must strike first in order to gain the upper hand" aptly described their situation now. Actually, there were more than 10 archmages in the Manhwa family's camp and the Tower of Dusk combined, but level 18 archmages were another story. While they were all archmages, every level was very different from the next, just as a level 17 archmage was worlds apart from a level 18 archmage. The 10 level 18 archmages made offensive spells fall down like rain upon them, making it very hard for them to find a chance to retaliate. Hence, the only thing they could do was to allow the spells to rain down on them and rely on the magical defense barrier for protection. Hutton smiled wearily as he glanced at Felix, silently rejoicing in the fact that the people from the Tower of Dusk had set up a magical defense barrier, or else they would have lost half their men by now. Then again, if not for Felix's invitation, he would not have to suffer through this with his men. Right then, trees started falling down in front of the campsite. Then, the trees at the edge of the campsite went flying as well, and 4 massive steel-like figures appeared in their field of vision. Alchemy colossuses. Hutton stared with wide eyes at the area in front of the camp, especially at the 4 massive steel figures. As the heir of the Manhwas, Hutton was quite knowledgeable, and knew quite a bit about the alchemy colossus, but then again, that was the extent of his knowledge as he had never seen them for himself, and thus did not have any real impression of them. When he heard from Lin Li that the enemy possessed alchemy colossuses, he did not give it much thought. These were dead creatures, after all, and not as great of a threat to him as the 10 archmages one. Now that he had seen the alchemy colossuses for himself, he realized how overwhelming their presence was. All the records he had read about the alchemy colossus came flashing vividly in his mind. The 4 alchemy colossuses before him were all at least 10 meters in height, and they had a bright golden glow as gold was the main material used to build them. Even then, they were smooth in appearance and without edges as they were covered in a complicated pattern all over their bodies. These 4 alchemy colossuses were not shaped like humans, they were in the shape of a magical beast from the eternal frost plains, the Icefield troll, instead. This was thought to be the most appropriate shape for an alchemy colossus. Lin Li had seen how Icefield trolls looked from some sources. They were like white chimpanzees or white gorillas. These alchemy colossuses were massive and broad. When they moved, they relied on their hind legs to support them so that when they stood up, their long arms would allow them to attack a wide area around them. After many comparisons and tests, many thought that an alchemy colossus was comparable to an archmage in terms of combat power, but even then, there were differences between an archmage level 15 and level 19, a huge difference, in fact. After factoring in aspects like defense, casting efficiency, and durability, an alchemy colossus was probably much harder to deal with than an archmage. The only thing was that alchemy colossus could not hide their true power like humans, and the only things determining their ability were the power source and the alchemy array. Hence, with the information from the alchemy array, Lin Li was able to quickly determine how powerful these alchemy colossuses were. President Felix, I've heard that there are differences between alchemy colossuses. Do you think these alchemy colossuses are? Hutton asked Lin Li, but did not make himself too clear, as this was a difficult line to draw. While a level 15 and a level 19 archmage might be different, so would be 2 level 15 archmages. Lin Li smiled as he looked into the distance, and calmly replied, below level 19. Oh, thank goodness. Hutton was influenced by Lin Li's calmness and heaved a sigh of relief as he mopped the sweat on his forehead. But after that, he froze and his handkerchief landed on the floor before he looked up with his eyes as wide as saucers and his expression stiff. What? What did you say? Below level 19? Lin Li nodded his head. Yes, but don't worry, I don't think that they are of legendary level yet, hence below level 19. Even though they may be comparable to a legendary magical beast in terms of their combined combat prowess, it is still only comparable. Comparable to a legendary magical beast, and 4 of them at once? Hutton was so scared he turned pale. He'd never thought it would be so risky prior to coming here. If it were only the 10 archmages earlier, that would be easier as he was sure that they could defeat them even with their combined forces, though it might not be an easy fight. Now, however, they even had 4 alchemy colossuses that were comparable to a legendary magical beast. Were they not courting death? The mages of the Manhwa family were terrified by the appearance of the alchemy colossuses. This was just a small campsite and not some city, so why did they have to use such powerful weapons? Damn it, how could the Sire bandits have something like this? They could have taken down a few cities and made their own kingdom. Why even be bandits? The mages from the Tower of Dusk were much calmer in comparison as they had seen much more in the last months. They had been no better than the mages from the Manhwa family at first, but after a while, they got used to it, and those who had fought these creatures were even more confident now. The booming sounds of the steps rang in their hearts as the ground shook beneath the colossuses, and they felt their hearts sink. They could not find it in themselves to fight back against the alchemy colossus, and all they felt was a sense of helplessness. Boom! A large tree is thrown at them and fell heavily on their defense barrier. No, we can't let them get too near. The defense barrier is limited in its ability to defend against physical attacks, and those are used to attack cities. Gavin was from the library indeed, as he knew quite a bit about the alchemy colossus. No matter how well the camp was set up, it was still a temporary camp, after all, and these alchemy colossuses were battle machines, always on the winning side in battles. Even a blow from one of them was sure to destroy the defense barrier, much less from all 4 of them. Nothing could be flawless, after all. The magical defense barrier's main purpose was to defend against offensive spells, and it could not endure much impact from physical attacks. A mirror could deflect light, but not a blow from a hammer, since the nature of the attack was different, so was the defense. Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.